Greetings, everyone. This is Monkey D. FIC. Prepare yourselves for. What if Luffy chose love over being king of pirates? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The shore he chose. The fish didn't care who he was. That was Luffy's favorite thing about mornings here. He'd sit at the end of the dock with his feet dangling over the water, a fishing rod in one hand, whatever food he'd stolen from the kitchen in the other, and the fish below would do exactly what fish always did: swim in lazy circles, ignore the bait, occasionally bump against the dock posts like they owned it. They didn't scatter when he laughed too loud. They didn't tense up when he moved fast. They just lived, unbothered and silver bright in the early light, and Luffy found that he could breathe differently around them. Windmere Island wasn't on any major route. That was why Nami had picked it. It sat at a strange crook between two ocean currents that most navigators avoided. The winds came from 3 directions at odd hours, the tides ran backward in the evening, and the port, such as it was, consisted of 14 fishing boats, a tavern that doubled as a post office, and a woman named Greta who sold smoked eel from a cart and knew everybody's business within 4 hours of it happening. The island's total population was somewhere around 800 people, depending on the season. In winter, fishermen from the outer atolls moved their families inward. In summer, a few of them left for trading runs to larger islands. Nobody came to Windmere on purpose. You passed through it, or you were born into it. Luffy had been here for 3 months. He bit into a rice ball. Nami had made them last night, grumbling the whole time about how he ate like a disaster, and watched a gull land on the dock railing 6 feet away. It looked at him with one suspicious yellow eye. "I'm not sharing," Luffy told it. The gull stared. "I mean it." It stared harder. Luffy finished the rice ball in one bite, and the gull flew away in apparent disgust. He grinned at the water and let the fishing rod hang loose in his fingers. He hadn't caught anything in 2 weeks, and he genuinely didn't mind. The catching was never really the point. Behind him, about 300 meters up a gravel path and past a low stone wall covered in flowering weeds, was the house. It wasn't much. 2 floors, one of them barely qualifying. The upstairs was really just a loft with a slanted ceiling that Luffy kept hitting his head on. The walls were whitewashed and needed a second coat on the east side. The kitchen was too small. There were exactly 2 chairs at the table, and he'd already broken one of them twice. The garden that Nami had started with furious, cheerful energy in the first week was doing well on the left side and catastrophically on the right, where she'd planted things in the wrong soil and refused to admit it. He'd carried her over the threshold as a joke when they first arrived, and she told him she would break his arm, and then she'd laughed into his shoulder. 3 months. He was still figuring out how to be here. Not how to stay. That part felt surprisingly easy, in a way he couldn't explain to anyone who hadn't known him before. The staying wasn't the hard part. The hard part was the particular shape of ordinary days. The way Nami made coffee in the morning and brought him a cup without asking, and he always drank it wrong, too fast, and burned his mouth, every single time. The way they argued about which route to walk into town, even though there was only one route, and somehow they still managed to disagree about it. The way she fell asleep reading maps, always maps, she couldn't stop, and he'd take the map off her face carefully, not carefully enough, and she'd mutter something at him without waking up. He was figuring out how to be here because he'd spent his entire life moving, and now he'd stopped, and the stillness wasn't bad. It was actually surprisingly loud with things he never had time to notice before. The fishing rod dipped. Luffy watched it, curious. It dipped again, then pulled hard to the left, and he yanked back on pure instinct, rubber band fast, no thought behind it, and something huge broke the surface of the water for one silver flashing second before the line snapped, and whatever it was disappeared back into the dark. He stared at the broken line. Huh! He'd have to tell Nami he broke another rod. She'd purchased 3 in the last month specifically because she'd said, very clearly, looking him in the eye, "Luffy, you cannot just grab the fish with your hand, you need to use the rod properly." He had nodded with complete sincerity, and then grabbed a fish with his hand the following afternoon because it was right there. The rod thing wasn't a natural fit for him. He stood up, stretched, and walked back up the path toward the house. Nami was at the kitchen table when he came in, charts spread out in front of her, and a pencil tucked behind her ear and another one in her hand. She was wearing a loose shirt, his shirt, he'd noticed, though she'd never said anything about having taken it, and her hair was down, still a little messy from sleeping. She looked up when the door opened. "You broke another rod," she said. "Something big grabbed it. Something big grabbed it," she repeated, the way she repeated things when she was trying to decide if she was annoyed. "Really big. I think it was a sea king. On a fishing dock. On this island. I don't control where sea kings go." She looked at him for a moment with that expression she had, the one that was trying very hard not to be fond of him, and then she looked back down at her charts. "There's coffee." He poured himself a cup and stood behind her, looking at what she was working on. She'd been charting something for 3 days now, methodically, filling in details in the margins. He recognized the shape of the New World's eastern edge. "This isn't one of our routes," he said. "No." She didn't look up. "I've been thinking about the wind patterns between Wano and the outer islands. There's a channel that opens up twice a year. If you hit it right, you could cut maybe 6 days off the journey. Why does it matter?" She paused, pencil hovering. "It doesn't. I'm just..." She moved the pencil in a small, idle circle. "I like doing it." He understood that. He sat down across from her, burned his mouth on the coffee, exact same way he always did, and watched her work. She had a very specific face when she was deep in navigation, concentrated and slightly disapproving of whatever the numbers were telling her, like she was personally offended by a difficult current. "Greta told me there's a marine ship about 40 miles south," she said, not looking up. Luffy processed that. "Patrolling? Standard route, she thinks. They come through every couple of months." Nami did look up now, briefly, meeting his eyes. "She also said they'd been asking questions at some of the closer islands." "About me? About unusual persons of interest." She made the phrase sound exactly as bureaucratic and stupid as it was. Luffy nodded slowly, and drank his coffee. The marine patrols had been a fact of life since Marineford, really, since before that, if he was honest. After Wano, after what had happened at Onigashima, and then the weeks that followed, the frequency had ticked up. His bounty was a number that made even veteran pirates feel a particular kind of tightened chest. He'd walked away from the sea not because he was afraid of the Marines, or the Yonko, or any of it, but because he'd been standing on the sunny one night, watching Nami plot their next course, and he'd realized with the clarity of falling that he was tired of moving towards something and never actually arriving. The One Piece would still be there. Or it wouldn't. But Nami was here. He told her on a clear night with bad stars and good wind, standing on the bow, and he hadn't planned it or built up to it. He just said it the way he said most important things, directly, immediately, without decoration. "I want to stop. I want to be wherever you are. I want to try that for a while." She looked at him for a long time, long enough that he'd gotten slightly nervous, which almost never happened, and then she'd said, "Okay, but I'm picking where." So she'd picked Windmere Island. The other Straw Hats had reacted with a spectrum of responses ranging from Chopper's immediate tearful joy to Zoro's long, heavy silence to Sanji's dramatic grieving that was almost certainly at least partially performative. Robin had simply said, "I thought so," which meant she'd seen it before any of them. Usopp had cried harder than Chopper. Frankie had built something. He always built something when he didn't know what else to do. A small model of the Sunny that he'd left on the dock before they'd gone their separate ways. Brook had played something beautiful and devastating on his violin. Jinbe had been last to leave. He'd stood in front of Luffy for a moment, and then bowed, deep and serious. "Captain," he'd said. "Don't call me that right now," Luffy had said. "Forgive me." Jinbe had straightened, and there had been something in his face, not disapproval, not grief exactly, but a kind of watchful sorrow. "Then I will call you Luffy-kun, and tell you that I am glad you found something worth stopping for. But I will also say this once and never again, the sea is not finished with you. I do not think you are finished with it either. Luffy hadn't answered. Jinbe hadn't needed him to. Do you want to move? Luffy asked now, in the kitchen, the cold coffee in his hand. Nami set her pencil down. It was a deliberate motion. No. If they're asking questions, I said no, Luffy. Her voice was even, not angry, but solid. I picked this place. I'm not running from a patrol route. And neither are you, if we're being honest, because you'd never run from them, you'd walk toward them grinning, and that's somehow worse. He grinned. It was reflexive. That grin, she said, pointing at it, almost laughing. That's exactly what I mean. I'm not worried about the patrol. I know you're not. She picked up her pencil again. I'm not either. I'm just telling you what Greta said. Outside, through the small kitchen window, the morning had gone fully gold. The water was visible from here, just a slice of it between the rooftops of the town below, blue and careless and enormous. Luffy looked at it. It looked back, the way the sea always did, like it remembered him specifically. The town center of Windmere was about what you'd expect from a settlement of 800 fishing people who'd lived on the same island for 4 generations. The main street was paved with stones that had been worn smooth by decades of boots and cart wheels. The buildings were low and practical, built to handle the strange tridirectional winds, with thick shutters and roof tiles weighted at the edges. The tavern, which was called the Anchor in the Argument, a name Luffy respected deeply, had been their longest, and it leaned slightly to the left because the man who'd built it had been, by all accounts, better at drinking than construction. Luffy walked through town most mornings. Not because he had anywhere to be, he didn't, but because he liked it. He liked the specific noise of a place that was working, fishermen with their early catch, the cartwoman Greta bellowing at a gull that had stolen a piece of her eel, children running past him with the flat-out urgency that only children and people in genuine danger could sustain. They'd gotten used to him quickly, which surprised him. He'd expected more questions. Windmere was isolated but not ignorant. They had a newspaper, one a week from the nearest major trade island, and wanted posters circulated even out here. Greta had recognized him in the first week, eyes going wide behind her cart, and he'd waited for the thing that usually happened, the fear, or the excited trembling, or the backing away. She'd said, "You broke my cartwheel last Tuesday." He had, in fact, accidentally leaned on her cart while eating a piece of her eel, and the wheel had come off because it had been loose before he touched it, but he was the most recent cause. "I'll fix it," he said. "You'll pay for someone else to fix it," she said, which was honestly more practical, and he'd borrowed money from Nami, which Nami had given him while making a face, and paid for the wheel, and that had been that. People here were pragmatic in the way people got when their lives depended on weather and tide. They didn't have time to be impressed or terrified for long. He was the odd man living up on the hill who broke fishing rods, and occasionally the local children used him as a jungle gym without asking permission, and he let them because it was funny. Normal. Almost. He stopped at the posting board at the edge of the square, a wooden board bolted to a post where the weekly paper was pinned alongside notices about tides and weather, and the occasional community event. The new paper was up. He scanned it the way he always did, not because he was worried, but because old habits from years of watching Nami check for news didn't die easy. The headline on page 3 caught him, not because his name was in it, but because of the name beside it. Marine Admiral Crane assumes command of New World Eastern District Operations. Sweeping new initiative to neutralize lingering threats to world stability. Begins immediately. He read it standing there in the morning light, the paper slightly damp from the sea air. He didn't know Crane. That was interesting, because he knew most of the big names, the admirals past and present, the names that moved fleets, the people who made the world government move the way it moved. Crane was new. Or new to him. The article was short on details and long on language like decisive action and unprecedented resolve, which meant someone in the upper offices was either very excited or very nervous about something. He left the paper on the board and walked home. Nami found the article first because she went to town that afternoon and came back with it in her hand and the particular expression she wore when she was solving a problem and wasn't sure yet if it was solvable. She put it on the table between them without a word. Luffy looked at it again. I saw it this morning. And I didn't recognize the name. She sat down. I asked around. Vivi's contact, the old channel we used to run letters through, sent something 2 weeks ago. I didn't mention it because I was still reading between the lines, but... She smoothed the paper with her palm. Crane was a revolutionary, Luffy. Before he was an admiral. He was with Dragon's movement for 6 years. He switched sides. Luffy raised an eyebrow. Why? Nobody knows the real reason. Officially, he had a change of philosophical heart. Her voice was dry as sand on the tone of officially. But the practical upshot is that he knows how the revolutionaries think. He knows their networks, their contacts, their arguments. And he is now an admiral with access to every fleet the world government can move. Luffy was quiet for a moment. Then, he knows who I am. Everyone knows who you are. He knows what I mean. If he was a revolutionary, he knows what a free person looks like to the people who aren't free. He'd know why that's dangerous. Nami looked at him. It was one of those moments. They'd been happening more since they came here, quiet ones, when she looked at him like she was seeing something she hadn't expected to find. Yeah, she said. Exactly. That's interesting, Luffy said. He didn't say it like a threat. He said it the way he'd always said interesting things, with genuine curiosity, no fear behind it, just the sharp-edged attention of someone who had met the world head-on his entire life and found it more fascinating than frightening. She folded the paper in half. I want you to know that I don't regret this. Being here. I need to say that before you, Nami. Let me finish. She looked at him directly. I need you to know that I don't regret it. Whatever happens. Because I've seen that look on your face before and I know what you're doing. What am I doing? You're calculating. Quietly. You're running the numbers on whether choosing this put me in more danger than the ship would have. She was right. She was almost always right about things like this, which was one of the things about her that made his chest feel like it was several sizes too small for everything he felt. He didn't answer. It didn't, she said. The ship would have been the same. There were always threats. There were always fleets and bounties and people who wanted to stop us. The only difference is here, I know where to buy fish and we have a garden. She paused. Half a garden. The left half is good. The left half is excellent and the right half is a crime against agriculture, but that's beside the point. Her expression softened in a way that she would never let anyone else see. I'm not scared of Crane. I know. Are you scared of Crane? He looked at her like the question was from a different planet. No. She smiled, small, real, the one that wasn't for anyone else. Okay then. She stood up, took the paper, and dropped it in the bin under the counter. I'm making dinner. Try not to break anything while I'm cooking. I'll help. You'll stay over there, she said, pointing at the far wall, and you'll watch. He watched. He stole bits of whatever she was cutting when she turned her back. She caught him every time. He did it anyway. This was the shape of ordinary days. 3 days later, the Southern Scout Post, a watchtower on Windmere's highest point, operated by a retired fisherman named Olu who had a spyglass and a generally suspicious disposition toward everything on the horizon, spotted sails. Not one ship. Not two. Olu counted 9 ships on the southern edge of visibility before he climbed down and started running, which was remarkable because Olu was 63 and had a bad knee, and the fact that he ran at all told everyone exactly how many sails he'd seen. The news moved through Windmere in about 20 minutes, which was fast even for a small island with a gossip infrastructure as efficient as theirs. It reached Luffy through the medium of 4 children who sprinted up the gravel path, burst through the gate of the stone wall, breaking it, which it had also needed, and hit the garden at full sprint, arriving at his feet in a tumbled heap. He'd been trying to fix the right side of the garden. He wasn't sure what had gone wrong with it, but he'd been digging on the theory that more digging would help. He looked at the children. Ships? 9, they said in overlapping, chaotic chorus. South. Big ones. Ola says there, I got it, Luffy said. He stood up, brushing dirt from his hands. He looked south, through the rooftops of the town and the thin strip of harbor and the open blue beyond, and he couldn't see them. They were too far. But he could feel the shift in the air, the particular pressure change that came when the ocean was moving weight around. 9 warships. That wasn't a patrol. Patrol routes didn't move in groups larger than 3. 9 ships dispatched at once meant someone had committed resources, made a decision at a high level, signed orders that got countersigned before they moved. Someone had decided that finding him was worth 9 ships. He felt something move in him that wasn't fear, wasn't close to it, but was the thing that lived next to it, and was often confused for it by people who hadn't felt both. It was readiness. The whole body coming online. The specific aliveness of a person who knows something is about to happen and is not even slightly interested in pretending otherwise. He turned around. Nami was standing in the doorway of the house, arms crossed, the expression on her face the particular one that meant she already knew. Greta told me, she said. Before the children got here. You know she's faster. 9 ships. 9 ships. She came down the 2 steps from the door. She was calm. That was the thing about Nami that people who underestimated her always forgot. She was a woman who had faced horror and loss and kept her head, who had sailed the most dangerous waters in the world and plotted courses through things that should have killed them all, and she did not panic. Her fear, when it came, was always useful and directed. Right now there was no fear in her face, just that sharp, weather-eye focus. They're a day out. Maybe a little less if the wind picks up the way I think it will. You already knew the wind would pick up? I've been tracking it for 2 days. The Tricurrent Junction is going to swing south by morning. She glanced at the sky, professional and automatic. Maybe sooner. He looked at her. She looked at him. I should warn the people here, he said. I already sent Joran's son to tell them to move the fishing boats to the northern cove. Joran was one of the fishermen who'd been quietly friendly to them, a large, quiet man who asked no questions and gave good weather reports. The town isn't in danger if the ships are coming for you. They'll focus on us. She met his eyes squarely. On you? Nami, I know what I said. 3 days ago, in the kitchen. Her chin came up just slightly. I meant it. I know you meant it. He crossed the garden to her in a few easy strides. Not reaching for her, just close. I'm not going to hide. Obviously. And I'm not going to run. I know. So, he looked south again, over the rooftops, over the invisible distance that 9 warships were currently crossing. I'm going to go down to the shore. And I'm going to wait for them. Something moved across her face, complicated, fast, there and gone. She reached out and put a hand on his arm. It wasn't soft. It was specific and grounded, the way she touched things when she meant them. Then I'll come with you. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. She removed her hand and took a step back toward the door. Let me get my climatact. He grinned. Stop, she said, going inside. He didn't stop. He grinned at the southern sky, where 9 ships were moving toward a small island where they had a half-dead garden and a loft with a slanted ceiling, and he felt the warm animal truth of exactly who he was, unchanged, undiminished, fully himself. He had chosen this. He had chosen her. He had chosen this island and this dock and this life that was still figuring out its shape. And the world was coming to take it from him. Let it try. Evening settled over Windmere with that particular golden weight of late light over water, the kind that made even ordinary things look like they were worth remembering. The harbor was quiet, Joran's son had done his job and the fishing boats were tucked into the northern cove like roosting birds. The town was still, not the stillness of fear but the hell-breath stillness of people who lived by the sea and understood that sometimes the sea delivered things you hadn't asked for, and you simply had to be ready. Luffy sat on the dock with his feet over the water. No fishing rod this time. Just his hands loose on his knees and the water below him full of indifferent silverfish. Nami sat beside him, climatacked across her knees, watching the southern horizon through Olu's borrowed spyglass. She'd updated her weather calculations twice since they'd come down, made small notes on a scrap of paper, tucked the paper away. "Wind's picking up," she said. "They'll be here by dawn." "Good." She lowered the spyglass and looked at him sideways. "You're in a very good mood for someone who's about to be attacked by a marine fleet. I'm in a normal mood. Your normal mood is terrifying to most people. That's their problem." She looked back at the horizon. The last sliver of sun was dropping below it, turning the water the color of copper and blood and the specific red that only existed at the exact edge of nightfall. "Do you think it's Crane himself?" she asked. "No," Luffy said. "Not yet. He'd send someone first. See what happens. See what you do." "Yeah." She nodded slowly, processing this. "So this is a test." "Probably. I think he wants to know if I'll fight or run." Luffy watched the horizon. "Or if I've gone soft." "Have you?" He turned his head and looked at her with an expression that was somewhere between amused and deeply sincere. "What do you think?" She held his gaze for a moment, then looked away. "I think the Marine fleet doesn't know what it's sailing into. Neither does Crane." "No." She was quiet for a beat. Then, quietly, not looking at him. "Luffy. Whatever happens tomorrow, I need you to know something." "Okay. I wouldn't take it back." She said it simply, no dramatics, the way she said true things. "Not any of it. Not the ship, not the choice, not this stupid dock or this stupid broken garden or this." She stopped. Took a breath. "I know what you gave up. I know what it costs. And I wouldn't take it back." He reached over, unhurried and easy, and put his hand over hers where it rested on her knee. She didn't pull away. The water moved below them, restless and dark and full of things that didn't care about fleets or admirals or the weight of choices. The stars came out one by one, the way they always did, reluctantly at first, then all at once, the way the best things came. Somewhere on the southern horizon, 9 warships were cutting through the dark water toward them. Luffy kept his hand on hers. He was not afraid. He was not hiding. He was not going anywhere. He was exactly where he'd chosen to be, and whatever was coming could come, because he had never, not once in his entire life, let the world tell him who he was or where he belonged. The sea could send its fleets. He'd be right here. In the early morning hours, when the stars were still out and Windmere was its quietest, a single gull messenger arrived at the watchtower on the island's southern point. Olu, who had not slept, because Olu never slept when there was something suspicious on the horizon, bad knee be damned, intercepted it. The message was not addressed to anyone on Windmere. It was a transmission report, rerouting through a secondary relay, the kind of bureaucratic backchannel that only existed at the higher levels of marine infrastructure. Olu couldn't read most of it. The cipher was above his level, but the header was clear enough. Office of Admiral Crane. Designation confirmed, Windmere Island. Asset in position. Proceed with Phase 1. Olu looked at the message for a long time. Then he hobbled down from the tower as fast as his bad knee allowed, because whatever Phase 1 meant, he suspected the man on the dock needed to know about it before the sun came up. Chapter 2. The weight of a quiet name. Olu arrived at the dock breathless and limping, waving the message like a man trying to flag down a ship that was already leaving without him. Luffy saw him coming from 200 meters away. He was already standing by the time the old man reached the dock's edge, and Nami was up a half-second after, spyglass in hand, reading the situation off Luffy's posture the way she'd always read weather off cloud formations, fast, instinctive, accurate. "Slow down," Luffy said, catching Olu by the shoulder before the man's momentum carried him off the dock entirely. "Breathe first." Olu breathed. It sounded like a bellows with a puncture. He thrust the message at Luffy. Luffy looked at it. The cipher was meaningless to him, but the header wasn't, and he read the header twice with the focused patience that people who didn't know him well always assumed he lacked. Then he handed it to Nami. She read it, and her jaw tightened, one small movement, quickly controlled. Phase 1, she said. Yeah. That implies a Phase 2. Yeah. Olu looked between them. I can't read most of it. But Admiral, I can read, and asset and position I can read, and I've been on this island 40 years and those words have never been in the same sentence as Windmere. He was catching his breath now, voice settling from panic into the grim practicality of a man who'd survived 4 decades of bad weather. What do you want me to do? Luffy thought about it for exactly as long as it took him to think clearly, which was not very long at all. Tell the people to stay inside in the morning. Not because of the fleet, they won't touch the town. But there might be someone already here. Olu's eyes widened. Here. On the island? Asset in position, Nami said quietly, still looking at the paper. Olu swore in a dialect that Luffy didn't recognize but appreciated. Then the old man turned around and headed back toward town at a pace that was remarkable for someone with his knee situation. Nami folded the message and put it in her pocket. The wind had picked up, exactly as she'd calculated. It was coming off the south now, warm and insistent, the kind that pushed ships forward whether they wanted it to or not. Someone's already on this island, she said. Probably. Could be a scout. Could be something more specific. Luffy looked toward the dark cluster of buildings that was Windmere's town center. Either way, they know we're aware of them now. Olu intercepted the message. Which means they'll move before dawn. She looked at the sky, calculating. 2 hours, maybe. Less, Luffy said. She looked at him. You want to find them. I want to know who we're dealing with before the fleet arrives. He stretched his arms, a simple motion, reaching up and out, and the rubber band extension of it in the dark was a quiet, casual reminder of what he was. Not a performance. Just comfort. Stay close to the house? Absolutely not, she said, and started walking toward town. He fell into step beside her, grinning at the side of her head. She didn't look at him, but the corner of her mouth moved in a way she'd probably deny. The town at 2 in the morning was all shadows and the sound of water. The lanterns that normally hung outside the tavern had been taken in, and most of the shutters that faced south were closed, people responding to Olu's warning faster than expected because 800 people who'd lived by the sea their whole lives recognized the particular shape of incoming trouble and had opinions about it. Luffy moved through the streets without any particular attempt at stealth. Stealth had never really been his method, and the asset, whoever they were, already knew he was here. Nami moved quieter beside him, climatact in hand, her eyes moving across doorways and rooflines with the sharp professional attention of someone who'd spent years on a ship where every angle could produce an enemy. They found the scout in the most obvious place possible, which Luffy found almost insulting on the scout's behalf, sitting in the alley beside the anchor and the argument, back against the wall, dressed in the kind of nondescript clothing that was specifically designed to look nondescript, and therefore looked slightly more suspicious than anything else. He was young, younger than Luffy had expected, maybe 20, with close-cropped hair and the build of someone who'd trained hard and recently. He had a transponder snail in his hand. He looked up when Luffy stopped at the mouth of the alley, and his face did something complicated, a fast sequence of recognition, calculation, fear suppressed into professionalism, all of it visible in about half a second. Hi, Luffy said. The young man stood immediately, hand going to his side. Not a sword. Something else, a device, flat and rectangular, and Nami recognized it before Luffy did because she'd seen the marine research reports that Robin had forwarded through their old communication network. Signal beacon, she said sharply. Luffy moved. He didn't stretch, didn't wind up, didn't telegraph it. He was just at the other end of the alley in a fraction of a moment, hand on the young man's wrist, the device in his other hand before the scout had processed that he moved at all. No violence behind it, just speed and certainty. The scout stared at him from very close range. Luffy looked at the device in his hand. Small, marine-issued, the kind that sent compressed location pulses to receiving ships. He turned it over once, then put it in his pocket. How many signals did you already send? The scout pressed his lips together. I'm not going to hurt you, Luffy said, with the straightforward honesty that was one of his most destabilizing qualities in tense situations. I just want to know. 3, the scout said finally. Position confirmed. Subject located. Phase 1 initiated. What's Phase 2? The young man looked at him. Something moved behind his eyes, not defiance, but something more complicated. He was scared, yes, but it was professional fear, trained and controlled. He believed in what he was doing. That was important. That was different from someone who was just following orders for a paycheck. I'm not authorized to share operational details with me, specifically, or with anyone. With hostile actors. I'm not being hostile, Luffy said, which was technically true. Nami appeared at his shoulder. She looked at the scout with the calculating attention of someone who was reading a difficult current. You're one of Crane's people, she said. Not a question. The scout said nothing. He recruited you himself, didn't he? Again, not a question. She was reading him, posture, the specific set of his jaw, the way he looked when Luffy said Crane's name. Not standard Marine recruitment. Personal selection. The scout blinked. It was involuntary. Thought so. She glanced at Luffy. He picks them young. People who believe in the mission, not just the institution. It's what made him effective as a revolutionary, and it's what makes him effective now. Luffy looked at the scout for a moment longer. What's your name? The scout seemed genuinely surprised by the question. Marine. Marine. Luffy handed him back the signal beacon, empty-handed, open gesture. The scout took it confused. The fleet's coming whether I do anything or not, right? Yes. Then you already did your job. Go back to whatever ship you came from. He stepped back, clearing the alley exit. Tell Crane I'm here. Not hiding. Right here. Marine stood very still for a moment, looking at him. Then something shifted in his expression. The professionalism was still there, but something else had gotten in underneath it, something that Crane probably hadn't accounted for in his operational briefings. He tucked the beacon away and walked out of the alley without another word. Nami watched him go. You let him leave. He already sent the signals. You could have detained him. Why? He said it genuinely. He's 20 years old, and he believes in something. That's not his fault. He started walking back toward the harbor. It'll be more useful to have him tell Crane exactly what happened here. Nami fell into step beside him again. You want Crane to know you're not hiding. I want Crane to know I'm not afraid of him. He paused. I'm not afraid of anyone. She didn't say anything to that, because there was nothing to say to it. It was simply true, the way the tide direction was true, something you accounted for in your calculations and moved on. They were back on the dock as the first pale gray of pre-dawn started bleeding into the sky, and that was when they heard the Sunny. Luffy heard it first, the specific sound of her, the particular creak of her hull and the set of her sails, familiar the way a voice was familiar, something you recognized before you consciously processed what you were recognizing. He turned toward the eastern harbor approach, and 2 minutes later the Thousand Sunny came around the northern headland under half sail, the carved lion figurehead catching the early gray light, and behind her, because they were never far apart, not really, another ship, Zoro's temporary vessel, a mid-sized sloop that had clearly been pushed hard to get here. Of course, Nami said, and the word contained an entire conversation. The Sunny dropped anchor 50 meters off the dock with the particular efficiency of a crew that had done it 10,000 times. The sloop pulled alongside. By the time the first person came down the rope ladder to the small launch, Luffy could already tell who it was by the body's shape alone. Zoro hit the dock in his usual way, which was to say with no announcement, and no greeting, and the immediate, assessing look of someone who had arrived at a location and was already measuring its defensive perimeters. He was wearing a dark coat over the haramaki, 3 swords at his hip, and the expression he always wore when something had annoyed him and he hadn't decided yet whether to address it. He looked at Luffy. Luffy looked at him. 9 ships, Zoro said. Yeah. South. Yeah. Zoro's jaw moved slightly. We saw them on the way in. They'll be here by dawn. I know. Another silence. Luffy waited. He'd known this was coming, not known in the sense of having predicted it precisely, but known the way you knew the shape of people you'd spent years fighting beside, the way you understood without being told. Zoro would come. That was simply true. Whether Luffy had wanted him to or not, and the honest answer was complicated, he was here. You look like you're doing well, Zoro said finally, which coming from him was essentially an emotional declaration. I am, Luffy said. Zoro nodded once, looked at Nami, and nodded at her too, and then stepped back to let the next person off the ladder. Sanji came down wearing an actual suit jacket, which meant he'd dressed specifically for this, which meant he'd had the time and presence of mind to change clothes before sailing into a potential war zone, which was entirely consistent. He saw Nami and his expression transformed from composed to luminous in the span of a millisecond. Nami Swan, Sanji. She cut him off with the practiced efficiency of years. I need someone who can actually cook to make breakfast for. She counted, looking at the Sunny's deck. However many people are up there. Anything, Sanji said, with complete sincerity, already moving toward the house. Luffy grabbed his collar as he passed. Thank you for coming. Sanji stopped. He looked at Luffy with a more complicated expression, the one underneath the persona that appeared infrequently and meant the actual thing. Where else would I be? He said, very simply, and then he was walking again. They came down in ones and twos over the next 10 minutes. Chopper, who launched himself off the rope ladder from 6 feet up and hit Luffy mid-chest at full speed, which Luffy caught easily and held, the reindeer pressing his face into Luffy's shoulder and making a sound that he would later insist was not crying. Robin, who descended the ladder with perfect grace and looked at Luffy with those calm, deep eyes and said, "You chose well," which was as close to a blessing as Robin gave. Frankie, enormous and blue-haired and louder than the wind, who swept Luffy up in a crushing, mechanical hug and said super so loudly that several shutters on the far side of town probably rattled. Brooke, who descended the rope ladder playing a small violin he'd apparently brought specifically for the occasion, a melody that was both joyful and achingly tender. Usopp, who arrived last off the Sunny and immediately said, "Okay, I've been practicing a new technique and I really feel like today is the day I get to use it." Which was Usopp speak for "I am somewhat terrified but I am here." And then, from the sloop, Jinbe. He was the last to come ashore. He stood on the dock and looked at Luffy with that ancient, patient face, and the morning light was starting to come now, properly, the sky going from gray to pink at the edges. "You came," Luffy said. 9 ships, Luffy-kun. Jinbe said it mildly, as though this explained everything, which it did. Sanji had, in the time between arriving and the rest of the crew getting off the boats, somehow commandeered Luffy and Nami's kitchen, supplemented his supplies from the Sunny's stores, and produced a breakfast that should have been impossible in that small room in that amount of time. There were things on the table that Luffy was fairly sure required more than one burner. He'd long since stopped questioning it. They ate at the table and outside on the steps and on the stone wall and wherever they fit, because 9 people and a reindeer did not fit inside a house built for 2, and the morning was warm and strange and everything felt very specifically like what it was, the last quiet hour before something loud. "How did you know?" Luffy asked, looking around at them. "Robin," said about 6 of them simultaneously. Robin, seated on the stone wall with coffee, smiled without particular apology. "I've been monitoring marine communication channels through the old Den network. When Crane was assigned Eastern District Command, I started watching more carefully. When the fleet was dispatched 5 days ago, I sent word." 5 days ago, Nami said. "It took me a day to confirm. I didn't want to send a false alarm." "Why didn't you tell me?" Luffy asked her. "I just did," Robin said pleasantly. Zoro, who was eating on the steps with his back against the wall, said, "We need to talk about the fleet." "After breakfast," Luffy said. "They'll be here after breakfast," Luffy said again, with the particular tone that wasn't loud or aggressive but was completely immovable. Zoro ate his breakfast. After breakfast was 15 minutes later, and they spread out in the space between the house and the stone wall, the broken garden gate swinging slightly in the morning wind, and the sun was fully up now, and the sea to the south was bright and open, and somewhere on it 9 ships were getting closer. 3 vice admirals, Robin said, standing, addressing the group with the precise calm of someone delivering a briefing. "I pulled partial manifests from the relay traffic. Dalton-class flagships for the lead vessels. The fleet is designated as a containment and neutralization unit, which in current marine doctrine means they're authorized for engagement without prior warning or negotiation. They're not coming to talk," Jinbe said, which wasn't a surprise but was useful to have confirmed. "No. And there's something else." Robin paused, the small hesitation of someone choosing how to frame difficult information. "One of the flagships is carrying something registered in the manifest as Special Weapon Package, Designation 7. Silence. "Okay," Luffy said. "What is that?" "I don't know precisely. But the classification level attached to it is above standard fleet ordnance. It's something new. Something Crane designed," Nami said. She wasn't looking at Robin, she was looking at Luffy, and there was something specific in her eyes, something that wasn't quite fear but was adjacent to it. Not for herself. He understood that. "Probably," Robin agreed. "Doesn't matter," Luffy said. Sanji looked at him. It doesn't matter what it is," Luffy said, and his voice was even and clear and carried the absolute, unbluffable certainty of someone who had stood in front of worse and not moved. "They'll show us what it does when they get here. We'll deal with it then." Zoro made a sound that was possibly agreement. "What I want to know," Luffy continued, "is what we don't do." He looked around at them. All of them. People who'd fought with him through hell, through the worst the world had dispatched, people who knew what he was capable of and had chosen to come here anyway, not to drag him back, just to stand with him. Something moved through him, warm and specific. "We don't let them near the town. The people here have nothing to do with this. I can get the town evacuated to the northern cove," Nami said. "Joran's already organized it. Give me an hour." "You've got 40 minutes, Luffy said. She looked at the sky, calculated, nodded. 40 minutes works. She looked at Usopp. "I need you with me." Usopp sat up straight. "I am literally the best person for this scenario, you're the most organized," she said, which was both a compliment and a management decision, and Usopp accepted it with the dignity it deserved. "Robin, Frankie, and Brook, the 3 of you take the eastern side of the harbor. Keep the dock clear. Jinbe." She paused, because directing Jinbe had always required a specific approach. "The water. I think you know." Jinbe nodded, already looking at the harbor with the assessing eyes of a fisherman who had been master of the seas since before most of the people in this conversation were born. "I'll watch the approach." "Zoro." "Sanji." Luffy looked at them. "With me." Zoro stood up from the steps, unhurried, and drew Wado Ikimanji a single inch from its sheath, a checking motion, confirming the draw. He said nothing. He was already ready. Sanji stubbed out the cigarette he'd been smoking through the entire briefing, ground it under his heel with a kind of precise finality, and said, "Tell me the cook gets to hit someone first." "You can fight Zoro for it," Luffy said. "I don't fight Zoro, not now," Luffy said, already moving toward the harbor. The quiet hour before battle had a specific texture. Not silence exactly. The world didn't go quiet, it went selective, dropping the unimportant sounds and sharpening the ones that mattered. Wind. Water. Rope and sail at a distance. Nami had taken Usopp and vanished into town with the focused efficiency of a general who'd already made her plan and was now simply executing it. Luffy could hear her voice at intervals, calm and clear, coordinating, and the sound of families moving, boots on cobblestone, the muffled sounds of 800 people organizing themselves to be somewhere safer. She was remarkable at it. She'd always been remarkable at it, the logistics of carrying, the exact geometry of keeping people safe. He'd known it for years and somehow it still caught him sideways sometimes. He stood at the harbor wall with Zoro on his left and Sanji on his right and looked south. There they were. The fleet was visible now, 9 ships in tight formation, the lead 3 flying vice admiral flags, the others arranged behind them in a combat spread. The sun was behind Windmere, which meant the light was in the fleet's eyes and off the island's back. Nami had probably calculated that, when she'd picked the island, when she'd chosen which end faced what direction. He wouldn't be surprised. Zoro was looking at them with the professional attention of someone counting targets. Sanji was smoking another cigarette. "How do you want to do this?" Zoro asked. Luffy watched the fleet come. "Give them the chance to stop." Zoro glanced at him. "You think they will?" "No." He stretched his arms again, rolling the shoulders, getting loose. "But I'll give them the chance." Sanji said. "That's surprisingly diplomatic of you. I just don't want people to die for nothing." He paused. "They still might. But at least it won't be for nothing on my side." The lead ship, the largest, the flagship, had a figurehead shaped like a marine anchor, which was imaginative in the same way that naming a sword was imaginative. Through the brightening morning they could see figures on the deck, and on the forecastle, someone in a vice admiral's coat. The fleet had reduced sail. They were slowing. Not stopping, but deliberate. They knew he was standing there. Marin would have told them. "They want to see what I do," Luffy said. "Whether I run or fight." "Tell them," Sanji said quietly. Luffy stepped up onto the harbor wall, standing above the water line, and he stretched one arm back and then pushed his voice forward. Not Conqueror's Haki, not yet, just himself, just the full open-throated voice of a man who had never once in his life said anything quietly that needed to be said loudly. "I'm Monkey D, Luffy!" The voice carried across the water like a stone thrown hard, flat and clear. "I'm not running! If you're here to fight, come and do it! If you're here to talk, send a boat! But I'm not moving from this dock and I'm not scared of whatever you brought." The fleet held its position. For 30 seconds, nothing moved except water. Then, on the flagship's deck, a signal flag went up. Luffy didn't know signal flag code as well as Nami did, but he recognized the sequence. Zoro had made him learn the basics once during a particularly boring stretch of sea. This one said, "Hostile force confirmed. Engagement authorized." Luffy stepped down from the wall. "Okay," he said. "Okay," Zoro agreed. "Finally," Sanji said, and dropped the cigarette. The first cannonball hit the harbor wall 10 meters to their left, and the battle for Windmere Island began. It was 3 vice admirals and 9 ships against 1 retired pirate who was not, by any stretch of the imagination, retired in any way that mattered. The first wave of Marines came in landing craft, 20 to a boat, 8 boats, 160 men hitting the dock and the harbor shallows with bayonets and armament, and the organized aggression of people who had trained extensively for exactly this. They were not conscripts. They were Crane's unit, the personal selection that Nami had identified in the alley, true believers, capable, operating with intelligence and precision. Luffy let them get close. Not because he needed the distance reduced, he didn't. But because he wanted them to see him clearly. No mistake about what they were dealing with. The first Marine who reached him was a lieutenant with a serrated blade who moved fast and well and committed to his attack without hesitation. He got within 3 feet of Luffy. Luffy caught the blade with 2 fingers, rubber soft and completely unyielding, and looked at the lieutenant with an expression that was perfectly friendly. "You're good," Luffy said. The lieutenant stared at the stopped blade. "You can go back to your ship," Luffy said. The lieutenant tried to push the blade forward with both hands and his full weight behind it. Luffy flicked his wrist and the blade went sideways and the lieutenant went with it, stumbling past him into the harbor wall. Luffy turned to the next one. The next 40 seconds were something that the Marines who survived it would later struggle to describe accurately. Not because it was blurry. It was actually extraordinarily clear, that was the problem. Every moment was distinct and sharp and impossible. Luffy moved through 160 armed Marines the way a river moved through rocks, not around them, through them, hands and arms and the elastic, physics-defying reach of a fully awakened devil fruit user who was being, by his own standards, quite restrained. Nobody died. That was a choice. Breaking somebody's arm instead of their spine was harder. It required more precision, but Luffy had always been more precise than people thought, even at full speed. Zoro hit the right flank of the landing force at the same moment, 3 blades moving in the 3-sword style, and the sound it made was like a waterfall hitting rocks, continuous, powerful, inevitable. Marines flew. Not fatally. Zoro was also, by his own savage standards, being measured. Sanji went left, and the kick he opened with was a full-speed rotating strike that hit 4 men simultaneously and deposited them into the harbor in a single sweep, and after that he stopped counting his own hits because he was moving too fast to bother. The first wave was finished in under 2 minutes. Luffy stood in the wreckage of it, men groaning, not dead, the harbor wall smoking where stray fire had hit it, and looked at the fleet. The ships were repositioning. Coming closer. The cannons on the lead flagship were swinging to bearing. On the deck, the vice admiral in the white coat was watching. And then, from the middle ship, the one Robin had flagged, something was brought up on deck. Luffy couldn't see it clearly at this distance, but he could feel the attention around it, the way the crew on that ship moved differently near that particular cargo, careful and significant. Special weapon package, designation 7. He had about 30 seconds before they used it. He looked at Zoro. "Can you hit that ship from here?" Zoro looked at the distance. It was 300 meters of open water. "I need the wall." "Take it." Zoro walked to the harbor wall, put one foot on the edge, drew 2 blades, and looked at the ship with an expression of total concentration. He was going to hit something specific, not the ship, not random destruction, but the weapon on the deck. 300 meters. Moving target on open water. He breathed out. "Hiryu Kane!" The air cracked. A curved blade of compressed force crossed 300 meters of open water in less than a second and hit the deck of the middle ship dead center. Not the weapon. 2 meters to the right. Which, for 300 meters on a moving ship, was extraordinary. But not enough. Luffy saw the marine crew scrambling around the weapon casing, saw the activation sequence beginning, and he made a fast, simple calculation. He looked at the harbor behind him. Nami and Usopp weren't back yet. He looked at the town, quiet, shuttered, the people inside hopefully far enough north by now. He looked at the ship. Then he reached back, stretched both arms as far as they went, coiled the rubber of himself into the specific geometry of Gear 3rd, and hit the water. The shockwave crossed the harbor in a flat ring and hit the fleet's formation broadside, not a targeted strike but a push, a wall of force that rocked all 9 ships simultaneously, enough to delay, enough to interrupt, and he was already moving while the waves were still spreading. He landed on the deck of the middle ship. He was alone on a marine flagship in the middle of a fleet. The Marines on that deck took one look at him and made the completely reasonable decision to be very afraid. "Where's the weapon?" Luffy said pleasantly. Nami was coming back down the hill when the shockwave crossed the harbor, and she felt it through her boots and the soles of her feet like the island itself had exhaled. She stopped walking. Usopp walked into her back. "Sorry, what was—" She was looking at the harbor. At the fleet. At the middle ship, which was rocking significantly harder than the others. "He's on the ship," she said. Usopp followed her gaze. He squinted. "He jumped onto a flagship." "He jumped onto a flagship." She took a breath. And despite everything, the fleet, the Admiral's operation, the weapon, all of it, she made a sound that was halfway between exasperation and laughter. "Of course he did. Should we should finish getting the last families to the cove." She started moving again, faster now. Luffy doesn't need us on that ship. He needs the town clear. Usopp kept pace with her. And the weapon thing Robin mentioned? Nami was quiet for 4 steps. Whatever it is, she said finally, he'll figure it out. How can you be so, because I know him? Simple. Absolute. No hesitation in it, the way you didn't hesitate about the direction of a current you'd sailed 1,000 times. I know who he is. Whatever they brought, it won't be enough. Usopp was quiet for a moment. Then, you're completely in love with him. I will push you down this hill, she said. That's a yes. She didn't push him down the hill. She walked faster, and Usopp jogged to keep up, and behind them the harbor was full of sound and water and the specific ongoing chaos of the world discovering, again, that Monkey D. Luffy was not a man you sent 9 ships for and came home confident. The sun was fully up. Windmere Island blazed gold and blue, and the sea around it was crossed with wakes and the sounds of battle moving from the harbor to the water as Jinbe brought his expertise to bear on the landing craft that tried to circle north. Subtle, absolute, the fisherman's mastery of ocean current redirecting entire boats with the precision of a sculptor. Brook played violin on the eastern dock. Nobody questioned this. Brook playing in the middle of a battle was simply a fact of the world, and his soul's solid proved a remarkably effective deterrent when the blade came out between songs. Frankie had, in the time between arriving and the battle starting, built something. He always built something, and the something in question was a modified cannon mount on the harbor wall that he was now operating with tremendous enthusiasm and a very loud mouth. Frankie Cannon, Special! The east side of the harbor was fully defended. On the middle flagship, Luffy had found the weapon. It was smaller than he'd expected, which was the first interesting thing. A cylinder, maybe 2 feet long, marine blue, with an activation panel that had been partially triggered in the chaos of his arrival. A marine weapons engineer was trying to reach it from the far side of the deck and not doing well because there were approximately 15 unconscious crewmen between him and it. Luffy picked it up. He turned it over in his hands. He looked at the weapons engineer, who had given up on reaching the device and was now frozen at the far side of the deck. What does this do? The engineer did not answer. Luffy looked at the device more carefully. It was labeled, in small marine standard print, along the casing. He read slowly. Reading wasn't his best skill, but he was motivated, and the label said, Targeted Individual Influence Device, Designation 7. Do not activate without confirmed subject proximity. He read it again. Targeted individual. Not him. Not something that would hurt him. Something designed for a specific someone. He felt the temperature drop in his chest, not fear, never quite fear, but the cold edge of understanding arriving all at once. They weren't going to use it on him. They'd send it here, to this island, to use it on someone he loved. He looked at the device for 1 more second. Then he closed his hand around it, one full, rubbery enforced grip, and crushed it into scrap. He looked at the weapons engineer. Tell Crane, Luffy said very quietly, that if he wants to threaten my people, he's going to have to do it himself. Because I'm not interested in playing with his tools. The engineer nodded. It was small and terrified and genuine. Luffy jumped off the ship. He landed in the harbor and waded ashore, and Zoro and Sanji were waiting on the wall, and behind them the sounds of the battle were already changing, reducing, the marine landing craft pulling back, the ships repositioning to a holding distance that was much further out than where they'd started. Not retreating. Regrouping. But it was a pause. A held breath. Crane's fleet calculating what had just happened and what to do next. You good? Zoro said. Yeah. Luffy looked at the fleet. At the distance. At the morning sea. He felt something that wasn't quite anger but was in the same family, deliberate, solid, specific. They brought something for Nami. Zoro went very still. Sanji went a different kind of still, the kind that preceded catastrophic velocity. I broke it, Luffy said. But that's what this is. That's what Crane is doing. He's not coming for me directly. He's coming for everything around me. The three of them stood on the harbor wall and looked at the fleet. So what do we do? Sanji said, and for once there was no performance in his voice. Just the question, direct and real. Luffy turned away from the fleet and walked back toward the town, toward the path that led up to the house, toward where Nami would be coming back from the northern cove. We talk, he said. And then we stop letting him set the terms. Chapter 3. What the sea remembers the fleet didn't leave. That was the thing. After the harbor battle, after the landing craft retreated and the ships pulled back to 2 kilometers offshore, they simply sat there. 9 ships on a bright morning sea, unmoving, like a sentence left unfinished. Like a question waiting for an answer it hadn't gotten yet. Luffy stood on the harbor wall and looked at them and understood what it meant. They weren't beaten. They were waiting. Which meant Crane had anticipated this, had perhaps even planned for it, built the first engagement as information gathering rather than a genuine attempt to overwhelm. The vice admirals out there weren't sulking. They were reporting. He turned his back on the fleet and went to find Nami. She was coming down from the northern cove path with Usopp 3 steps behind her, and her hair was loose from whatever she tied it back with, and there was dust on her boots, and her climate act was in her hand, and she was already looking at the fleet over his shoulder before she'd even reached him. They're not leaving, she said. No. The weapon, she said. Did you find it? I found it. I broke it. Something moved across her face, relief, quickly folded away into the practical. What was it? The label said targeted individual. He watched her absorb that. Not me. Her jaw tightened. That was all. The reaction was small and controlled, and he understood exactly what it cost her to keep it that small. Okay, she said. Okay? I said okay. She walked past him toward the house. Usopp fell into step beside Luffy and said very quietly, She's not okay. I know. Are you okay? No. Usopp nodded with the sagacity of someone who had been afraid for years and developed a genuine expertise in it. At least you're both honest about it. The Straw Hats reconvened in and around the house with the organic disorder of a crew that had been doing this long enough to know the rhythm of it. After action, regroup, assess, eat something, talk. Sanji had somehow produced more food. Luffy genuinely did not understand the mechanics of how he did it, and had decided that it was simply one of those facts about the universe that you accepted and moved forward. Robin laid it out first, because Robin always laid it out first, not because she was designated to, but because she had already processed everything and was ready to discuss it while everyone else was still catching up. She sat on the garden wall with a cup of coffee and spoke with the measured precision that Luffy had always thought was how she protected herself, wrapping difficult things in clean sentences. Crane designed that device specifically, she said. The targeting signature in the label, confirmed subject proximity, means it needed to be activated close to its target. Within 20 meters, probably. It wasn't dropped from a ship. Someone was going to use it on the ground. She looked at Nami. It was for you. Nami was sitting on the steps of the house, climatacked across her knees, looking at the middle distance. What does it do? She said. I don't know precisely. But based on the classification level and what I know of Marine experimental weapons doctrine, it's not a physical weapon. It doesn't kill. Robin paused. It changes something. Memory, possibly. Or it creates fear responses, synthetic, targeted, compelled. Something that would make you. She stopped again, choosing her words with unusual care. Something that would compromise your ability to function. Silence. Sanji's cigarette had gone unsmoked between his fingers for the last 4 sentences. It would make her afraid, Luffy said. Flat. Quiet. Or unable to navigate. Or compliant in ways she wouldn't choose to be. Robin's voice was steady because she had learned a long time ago how to be steady when saying terrible things. Crane isn't trying to hurt you physically, Luffy. He's trying to hurt you specifically. He knows what matters to you. He's targeting the architecture of your life. He's a smart man, Jinbe said from his position near the wall, arms folded, looking south. I will give him that. Doesn't help him, Zoro said. No. But it means we can't predict his next move the way we would with a standard admiral. Jinbe turned to look at the group. Standard admirals send power. Crane sends precision. Luffy had been listening to all of this with the focused stillness he sometimes fell into, not checked out, not bored, but processing in a way that was his own and faster than it looked. He looked at the fleet. Then he looked at his crew. Then he stood up. We need to know his next move, he said. Not guess. No. That's not. Usopp started. Robin. Luffy looked at her. The relay network. Is it still active? Parts of it. Can you reach anyone close to Crane's command? Not Marine intelligence. Someone who's watched him. Someone who knows how he thinks. Robin considered this for a moment. Possibly. I'd need the Den in the Sunny's communications room and a few hours. You've got 1 hour, Luffy said. The fleet is reporting to Crane right now, and he's going to decide what Phase 2 looks like. I want to know what he's deciding before he decides it. Robin stood, set down her coffee, and walked toward the Sunny without another word. What do the rest of us do? Frankie said. Luffy looked at the house. At the town below, where Windmere's people were still tucked away in the northern cove, their boats and their lives and their 4 generations of ordinary existence waiting for this to be over. The people here need to stay put until the fleet moves or this is resolved, he said. Frankie, I need the harbor defenses better. The eastern wall took a hit. Already clocked it, Frankie said, cracking his knuckles. Brook, I need you on the Sunny. If the fleet moves to cut off the northern approach, I want to know immediately. Of course, Captain. Brook paused. Should I bring the violin? Bring whatever you want. Yo-ho-ho-ho. Excellent. Chopper had been very quiet since the battle, which meant he'd been treating injuries, his own version of useful, moving through the crew and the townspeople with his doctor's bag and his particular focused frown. He looked up now. What about me? You stay close to Nami, Luffy said. Nami looked at him. I don't need it, I know. He met her eyes directly. It's not about need. She held his gaze for a moment, then looked away. Fine, she said, which was a specific kind of concession from her. Chopper beamed. I'll try not to be annoying. You're never annoying, Nami said, which was not entirely true but was the right thing to say. Zoro and Sanji were still on the harbor wall, both of them looking at the fleet with the mutual competitive focus of 2 people who genuinely couldn't stand each other, and would also unambiguously die for each other, which had always been one of the more interesting relationships in Luffy's life. He went and stood between them. What do you actually think? He asked. Not directing it at either of them. Just putting it out there. Sanji answered first. I think Crane is better than a standard admiral, and we should treat this like a long game rather than a single battle. Zoro said. I think the fleet out there is bait. Both of them looked at him. 9 ships, Zoro said. But Crane's not on any of them. We've confirmed that. So the 9 ships aren't the real threat. They're keeping us here, keeping us occupied, keeping our attention south. He turned away from the fleet and looked north. While something else happens. Luffy looked north. The sea to the north was empty, blue, and clear. What's to the north? He said. Sanji's eyes went flat. Nothing. Nothing's not an answer. No, I mean, nothing on the map. The northern approach from here is open water for about 60 miles before you've hit the outer atoll chain. Who's on the outer atoll chain? Luffy said. Neither of them answered immediately. Luffy thought about it himself. The northern atolls, he'd sailed past them twice, barely registered them. Fishing settlements, mostly. Similar to Windmere. Small, quiet, not on major routes. Not on major routes. He turned to look for Nami and found her already coming down the steps, climate act in hand, and she had the specific expression of someone who had been thinking about this longer than the conversation had been happening. The northern atolls? She said before he could ask. There's a settlement there called Kale Point. Small, 300 people, maybe less. It's on our relay route, technically. We use their signal tower to bounce messages. If Crane knows about our relay network, Luffy said, he'd know about Kale Point. She said it quietly. And Kale Point doesn't have anyone who can defend it. Zoro turned fully north. The 9 ships are a distraction. Yes, Nami said. I think so. Luffy felt something crystallize. That precise quality of understanding arriving all at once. Crane had been a revolutionary. He'd thought like one, organized like one, and he understood that the most effective way to move a stubborn person was not to push them directly but to apply pressure to something they couldn't ignore. The fleet kept them here. And while they stayed here, watching the fleet, something happened at Kale Point that required them to choose. Stay and fight the fleet. Or leave to help the northern settlement, and give the fleet an open harbor. Split and be weak in both directions. Or find a third option. We split, Luffy said. But not evenly. Sanji looked at him. You have something. I go north. With Zoro. He looked at Zoro, who had the slight jaw-forward expression of someone who was approximately 2 seconds away from full agreement. The Sunny is faster than anything in that fleet. We take her north on the current Nami picks, and we get to Kale Point before whatever Crane's sent there gets into position. And the fleet? Sanji said. You hold the harbor. Luffy said it simply, with no theatrical weight. Just an instruction issued to someone capable of carrying it. Sanji was quiet for a long moment. Not hesitating, calculating. Sanji's cooking face and Sanji's combat face were actually very similar, the same focused assessment of available ingredients and possible results. Me, Jinbe, Frankie, Brook, Usopp, Chopper. He exhaled smoke. And Nami. Nami runs the defense, Luffy said. Nami said. Obviously. Which settled the matter. They've got 9 ships, Sanji said. I know. Luffy looked at him. I know what you are, Sanji. 9 ships of marine infantry are not going to overwhelm this harbor with you and Jinbe on the water. Sanji stubbed out his cigarette. He didn't say anything for a moment, and then he said something that came from a different place than his usual register, quieter, real, without the persona in front of it. How long since I've seen you fight at full power? Onigashima. Right. Sanji nodded. You're not just Luffy anymore. You haven't been since you woke up. I've always been Luffy. Luffy said, slightly confused by the framing. I know. That's what I mean. Sanji looked at him for a moment with something complicated and genuine. Go north. We'll hold the harbor. Robin came back from the Sunny's communications room 40 minutes later with information that confirmed and expanded what they'd already reasoned. She'd reached an old revolutionary contact, someone who'd served alongside Crane in the movement's middle years and now operated in careful obscurity. The contact had spoken in coded fragments, the way people spoke when they were afraid of being heard, but the substance was clear enough. Crane's method, she explained, was called compression. He had used it as a revolutionary strategist, the principle of finding the one pressure point that made your target's world smaller, then applying force to it from every direction simultaneously until the target either surrendered their position or made a mistake trying to protect too many things at once. He'd done it to 3 island governments during his revolutionary years. Bloodlessly. Efficiently. He'd changed governments without a single large battle by making every small position untenable. And now he was doing it to Luffy. He doesn't want to defeat you, Robin said, looking at Luffy directly. He wants to make you prove that loving something makes you weak. That's the ideological point he's trying to make. If Luffy chose love over freedom and that love becomes a liability, then the revolutionary idea that freedom requires total detachment is proven right. He's trying to make an example of me, Luffy said. He's trying to make an example of your choice. Robin's voice was precise as a scalpel. If he can demonstrate that choosing love, choosing to stay, choosing ordinary life, brings suffering to everything you love, then everyone watching learns the lesson that freedom and attachment are incompatible. Usopp said. That's deeply philosophical for an admiral. He's not just an admiral, Robin said. He used to be a believer. People who used to believe in something and stopped are the most dangerous kind of ideologist. The group was quiet for a moment. Then Nami said, So the best counter to that argument is Luffy being Luffy. Everyone looked at her. He wants to prove that Luffy's choice made him weak. So the counter is Luffy going north and protecting Kale Point without breaking a sweat, and Sanji holding this harbor against 9 ships, and none of us letting anything touch the people we came here to protect. She looked around at them all. We don't just win the fight. We win it in a way that makes his whole argument look stupid. Brook said, That is quite elegant, Nami-san. Thank you, Brook. Jinbe had the look he sometimes got, deep, slow, significant, the look of someone for whom understanding arrived like tides, unstoppable and broad. The captain chose love, he said. So we proved to the world that love is not a weakness. It is a different kind of strength. Luffy looked at Jinbe. I told you the sea wasn't finished with you, Jinbe said. But I was wrong about what that meant. It is not finished with you because you are not finished. You simply changed the shape of what you were fighting for. Luffy was quiet for a beat. Then he said, Jinbe. Captain. Keep my harbor safe. Jinbe smiled, slow and wide. I will keep your harbor safe. The Sunny left on a northern heading at a speed that the remaining crew of the fleet's 9 ships would later describe in their reports as inconsistent with the vessel's observed classification. Nami had calculated a current that ran north and slightly west along the island's lee, invisible from the southern approach, and the Sunny hit it and moved like something alive and deliberate. Zoro was at the bow. Luffy was at the figurehead. They moved in comfortable silence for a while, the island falling away behind them and the blue open north stretching ahead. The fleet was still visible to the south, tiny at this distance, 9 unmoving shapes against the bright water. Luffy watched them shrink. You know what you're doing out here? Zoro said, not accusing, just asking. Protecting Kale Point. I mean. Zoro paused, and when Zoro paused it meant he was working through something that mattered to him. Before. With the fleet. You held back. Luffy turned to look at him. I didn't hold back. You could have ended that engagement in 30 seconds. Probably. So why? Because they're not the real target, Luffy said. He turned back to the north. The vice admirals, the infantry, the marines and those landing craft, they're doing a job. They believe it's right, probably, because Crane picked them. But I'm not angry at them. They're not the problem. He paused. Crane is the problem. And I'm not going to destroy 3 vice admirals and 9 crews to prove a point to someone who isn't here to see it. Zoro was quiet. I'm not soft, Luffy said before Zoro could decide whether to say it. I'm specific. I know. Zoro looked at him sideways. I've always known that. The Sunny moved north. The sea opened up around them, the way it always did when you got away from land, the particular boundless blue that had always felt to Luffy like breathing properly after a room that was too small. He felt it even now, the pull of it, the clean sensation of open water. He hadn't forgotten this. He never would. He thought about what Jinbe had said. The sea is not finished with you. He'd been mulling it in the back of his head since that morning at the dock 3 months ago, trying to figure out what was true and what was just the sea being the sea, always pulling, always calling, indifferent to whether you wanted to answer. He had wanted to answer. He still did, some mornings. He would probably always want to answer. But he wanted Nami more. Not instead of the sea. Not as a replacement for the dream. He wasn't sure he could explain it in a way that would satisfy anyone who hadn't felt it. The dream of being king of pirates had been his whole life's direction, the arrow pointing forward, and he had followed it absolutely and without reservation, and that had led him to the best years of his life, to these people, to this moment on this ship, and to her. And he had looked at all of it together, one night on the bow with the stars out, and he had realized that the dream was never really about the title. It had always been about freedom. Total, self-determined, irreducible freedom. The king of pirates was free of everything, every rule, every authority, every ceiling on human possibility. That was what Roger had been. That was what Luffy had always wanted to be. And he'd realized, standing there, that he was already free. He'd been free for years. He'd been making free choices since he was 7 years old in Fuchsia Village, stealing food and fighting mountain bandits, and deciding that certain people were his friends and that designation was inviolable. He'd been free at Marineford. He'd been free at Onigashima. He'd been free at every moment when the world said you cannot do this, and he'd done it anyway. The One Piece was a destination. But freedom was just being himself. So when he looked at Nami on that night on the bow and understood what she was to him, what she'd always been, the person who knew where he was going better than he did, the one who made the map that got them there, he'd realized that choosing her wasn't giving up freedom. It was an act of it. The most free choice he'd ever made. "Oh," Zoro said. Luffy came back from wherever he'd been. "What?" "Look north." He looked. The outer atoll chain was visible now, a low, broken line of green against the blue, islands like scattered stones in a flat gray sea. Kale Point was the largest of them, he could see it, a low bluff with a signal tower and a scattering of buildings around a small harbor. And moving toward it from the east 3 ships. Smaller than the fleet's flagships but purpose-built, fast and lean, moving with the particular urgency of a crew that had orders and a timetable. "Crane's advance unit," Luffy said. 2 hours out, Zoro said, reading the distance with sailor's instinct. "We're 40 minutes out." Zoro's hand went to Watto. "Not drawing it. Just checking. So we have time to get there first." "We have time to get there, get the people out, and be waiting on the dock when they arrive." Zoro smiled. It was small and sharp and meant very specific things about his intentions. "You know I haven't had a decent fight in 3 months." "I know. I'm not complaining. I'm just noting it for context." "It's noted." "The 3 ships," Zoro said. "Are there vice admirals on them, or probably rear admirals?" Crane wouldn't waste vice admiral resources on a position play. He'd save them for the main event. "What's the main event?" Luffy looked at the approaching ships and then at the island ahead of them, and he thought about Crane in his command center somewhere, not on any of these ships, too smart for that, pulling the strings of a compression strategy, waiting for the moment when Luffy's attention was divided enough. "Us going back to Windmere," Luffy said. Zoro understood immediately. He waits until we move to solve the Kale Point problem. Then he moves on the harbor. Which is why I left Sanji. Zoro was quiet for a moment, processing. "That's actually good. Sanji is actually good." "I didn't say he wasn't." Zoro paused. "I just said he's annoying. Those aren't mutually exclusive." Zoro grunted something that might have been agreement. He turned to look at the Sunny's deck, at the ship that had been their home for years, beautiful and alive and responsive, the best ship in any ocean, and he was quiet in the particular way that meant he had something to say and was considering whether to say it. "Are you happy?" he said finally. Luffy looked at him. It was a genuine question, stripped of anything extraneous, delivered in Zoro's particular mode of directness that came out roughly once a year. "Yes," Luffy said. "Immediate. No decorating it." Zoro nodded once. "Okay. Are you?" Zoro looked at the sea. "I'm getting stronger," he said, which was his answer for most things. "That's not what I asked?" "I know." A pause. "Yeah. I'm okay, Luffy." "Good." They stood at the bow together as the Sunny moved north, the Kale Point atoll growing ahead of them, and the 3 ships to the east still 2 hours out, and for a few minutes they were just what they'd always been, 2 people who'd been through everything together, standing at the front of a ship that was going somewhere new, and that was sufficient. Kale Point's harbor was small enough that the Sunny barely fit, and they came in fast and the crew, just the 2 of them, Luffy on the sails and Zoro on the anchor with the practiced ease of people who'd sailed together long enough to cover each other's gaps, dropped anchor with enough confidence that the dock workers scrambled out of the way first and asked questions second. There were about 60 people visible on the dock and in the surrounding buildings, and they all stopped what they were doing to look at the lion-headed ship that had just arrived at considerable speed. Luffy jumped the railing and landed on the dock and said, "Hi! You need to move north. There are 3 marine ships coming from the east, and they'll be here in about 2 hours. The dock workers stared at him. One of them, a woman in a weathered coat, maybe 50, with the look of someone who made decisions for a living, stepped forward. She had a short baton at her hip that was probably for dock management, and possibly also for difficult situations. "Who are you?" "Luffy." She looked at him. Her eyes went to the Sunny. To the lion figurehead. Something moved in her face, recognition, swift and complicated. "Monkey D. Luffy." "Yeah." She was quiet for a beat, the kind of beat where someone is updating their understanding of the morning they thought they were having. Then, "The signal tower picked up movement to the east an hour ago. We didn't know what it was. Now you do. The marine ships, they're here for me. Not you. But you'll be in the way if you stay." He said it plainly, without trying to manage her reaction. "I'm not asking you to run from your island. I'm asking you to be somewhere safe while I deal with the ships. After that, you come back." The woman in the coat, the dock chief, he decided, looked at him for a full 5 seconds. Then she turned to the people behind her and said, "Get the boats ready. Northern Inlet, same as the storm plan. Move." They moved. Luffy watched them go and felt something he recognized from 100 islands across the Grand Line, the particular respect of being trusted not because of his name but because of how he'd said what he'd said. Direct. Honest. Not promising more than he knew. He turned to find Zoro already on the dock, swords at his hip, looking east. 1 hour and 40 minutes, Zoro said. "Let's eat something," Luffy said. Zoro looked at him. "I'm hungry," Luffy said. "The Sunny has food. We're about to fight 3 marine ships." "I know. I'm still hungry." Zoro sighed with his entire body and turned back toward the Sunny. "You haven't changed at all," he said, which he meant as a statement of fact and Luffy received as a compliment. The 3 ships arrived in 1 hour and 38 minutes, which meant they'd pushed their speed. Either they'd received new orders or they'd spotted the Sunny in the harbor from a distance, and decided urgency was warranted. Luffy was sitting on the dock when they arrived, eating. Zoro was standing 10 feet away with one sword out and the other 2 available, watching the ships come with the kind of attention that a hawk gave to an open field. The ships were fast, lean frigates, newly commissioned, marine blue with reinforced hulls. They came in tight formation and dropped anchor at the harbor mouth rather than trying to enter, which was a reasonable choice given the harbor's size and the Sunny's presence. A launch came across the water. One man in it besides the rowers, a rear admiral, by the coat, a stocky man with gray at his temples and the weathered face of someone who'd spent his career at sea. He wasn't afraid. That was something. He stood in the launch and looked at Luffy on the dock and didn't look away. He climbed the dock ladder. Stood on the dock. Looked at Luffy. At the food in his hand. At Zoro with the sword out. "Rear Admiral Voss," he said. "I have orders to." "I know what your orders are," Luffy said. "Crane wants you to secure Kale Point and use it as leverage." Voss paused. A small pause, but real. "Admiral Crane's operational details are." "Sit down," Luffy said. "Eat something if you want." Voss did not sit down. He was a professional. But he also didn't reach for his weapon or signal the ships, which told Luffy he was a particular kind of professional, the kind that still had room in his head for things other than orders. "The people are gone," Luffy said. "They're safe. Whatever you were going to do to this settlement as a pressure play doesn't work if nobody's here." Voss looked at the empty settlement behind Luffy. His jaw moved. "Go back to Crane," Luffy said. "Tell him I was here when you arrived. Tell him the people were safe. Tell him I'm going back to Windmere now and the fleet can stay or go but the harbor is mine." Voss was quiet for a moment. He had the look of a man reassessing something fundamental. "You could have run," he said. I don't run. You could have fought us from inside the harbor at Windmere. Stronger position. Yeah. But you came here instead. Voss was working through it, out loud, not quite to himself. To get the civilians clear. Is that surprising? Luffy said. Voss looked at him, really looked at him, the way people looked at things they'd been told about for years and were now seeing directly. The reports say you're dangerous. I am dangerous. They say you're erratic. Unpredictable. Motivated by chaos. Luffy considered this. I'm motivated by what matters, he said. That probably looks like chaos from the outside. Voss was quiet again. Behind him, on the 3 frigates, crews were watching. Waiting for the signal, engagement, or retreat. Voss was the man who had to give it. I'm going to instruct my ships to hold position, Voss said finally. And I am going to send my report to Admiral Crane accurately. Okay. I want you to know that the Admiral's next move will be his own. Voss's voice was careful, measured, not a warning exactly, but not a warning. I cannot predict what he'll do with my report. I know. He's not. Voss stopped himself. He's not what? Luffy said. The Rear Admiral's jaw tightened. He's not interested in a fair fight, he said at last, and the specificity of what that cost him to say was visible in every muscle of his face. A Marine, saying that about his own admiral, to the man his admiral had sent him to threaten. It was quiet defiance, the kind that rarely made it into official reports. Luffy looked at him. Thank you, he said, and meant it. Voss climbed back down the dock ladder. The launch took him back to his ship. The 3 frigates sat at the harbor mouth, unmoving, as the Sunny's anchor came up and her sails caught the southward wind. Back at Windmere, the harbor was still standing. It was standing in the specific, energetic sense that things stood when Sanji was defending them. The East Harbor Wall had a new scorch pattern that hadn't been there this morning. 2 of the fleet's landing craft had been converted into floating wreckage at the harbor mouth, and Jinbe was wading out of the shallows with the serene expression of a man who had spent the last 3 hours doing something he was extraordinarily good at. The fleet had pulled back further. 4 kilometers now, instead of 2. Luffy took this in from the Sunny's bow as they came around the island's eastern point, and he felt something release in his chest. Not quite relief, because he believed in the people he'd left behind, but the confirmation of belief. The satisfaction of having trusted correctly. He found Sanji on the harbor wall, smoking, coat on one shoulder, a shallow cut across his left cheekbone that he clearly hadn't had time to deal with. How bad? Luffy said. Not bad. Sanji touched the cut absently. One of the vice admirals is better than I expected. The other 2 were fine. He paused, looking at the fleet. They used something, a technique, not a weapon. Something that shuts down senses temporarily. I was blind for about 40 seconds. Luffy looked at him. You held the harbor blind. 40 seconds. Sanji shrugged, which was the most understated thing he'd done all day. Jinbe was there. Still. Don't make it a whole thing. Luffy made it a whole thing anyway. He clapped Sanji on the shoulder with the full warmth of someone who didn't perform gratitude but lived it, and Sanji looked away toward the fleet with an expression that was definitely not moved. Nami found Luffy before he found her. She came off the harbor wall where she'd apparently been standing for long enough that she knew the angle of the fleet's positioning relative to their own sight lines, climate act in hand, the west wind in her hair, and she looked at him the way she looked at coastlines she'd finally navigated past, with the specific relief of someone who'd been tracking danger and had found safe water. Kale Point? She said. Clear. People safe. He looked at her. You? Fine. She pointed at Sanji's cheek. He's the one who had a rough morning. I'm aware. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the fleet. The afternoon was going golden now, the sun tipping west, the sea changing color around the sitting ships. They're not going to push again today, she said. Crane is regrouping. Reassessing. How long do we have? She calculated, looking at the light, the wind, the position of the ships. It was unconscious, fully automatic, the way breathing was. Morning. The window before dawn, that's when he'll move, if he moves the same pattern. He won't use the same pattern, Luffy said. No. She looked at him. He'll come himself. He looked back at her. They both knew it. It wasn't a guess, it was the logic of Crane's own method, the compression that was pushing toward its inevitable conclusion. The vice admirals had been tested and come back with information. The Kale Point gambit had failed. The harbor defense had held. Every move designed to make this situation untenable had found Luffy in the way, and not just there but there first. Crane would understand by now that he wasn't dealing with the comfortable, diminished version of Luffy that retirement was supposed to have created. He'd come to see for himself. Are you scared? Nami asked. Her voice was quiet, without performance, just asking the real thing. Of Crane? Luffy said, and the word scared sat in his mouth like a concept from a foreign language, not offensive but unfamiliar. No. Not of losing? He looked at her. I'm not going to lose. I know you're not. That's not. She exhaled. I'm not scared of him either. I want to be clear about that. I know. I just want you to know that if something goes sideways, if there's a moment where it's a choice between winning and keeping someone safe, I need you to keep someone safe. He looked at her for a long time. The evening light was on her face and she was looking at the water, and she was the most consistently correct person he knew about most things that mattered, and what she was saying was real and he heard it. I know, he said. She turned and looked at him. Say it back. I'll keep you safe. I meant the crew. I know what you meant. He held her gaze. I'll keep all of you safe. She held his gaze for another beat, then looked away. Her hand found his wrist, not his hand, just the wrist, a specific point of contact that was hers, that she'd chosen, that he'd come to recognize as her particular language for I trust you and I'm not going to say it out loud but I'm saying it. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. The fleet sat on the water, 4 kilometers south, patient and waiting, and somewhere beyond them, in a command center that was probably immaculate and ordered and exactly what a former revolutionary turned Marine Admiral would need around him to think clearly, Crane was reading his reports and updating his model of who Monkey D. Luffy actually was. The evening came down soft and orange over Windmere. The people came back from the northern cove in ones and twos, returning to their houses and their boats and their 4 generations of ordinary life, and Greta was the last one back, pushing her eel cart up the main street with characteristic stubbornness, and she stopped when she passed Luffy on the corner. She looked at him. He looked at her. You broke my cart again, she said. He had not, in fact, touched her cart. Sorry, he said anyway. She sniffed and pushed the cart past him and went home. He watched her go, and the specific ordinary beauty of her going home to her specific ordinary life on her specific ordinary island was something he kept in his chest alongside everything else. The fleet on the water, the weapon Crane had designed, the move that was coming at dawn. All of it. Held together. He was not going to let any of it go. Chapter 4. The conversation between kings. He came alone. That was the first surprise. No ship, or rather, no warship. A single small vessel, sloop-rigged, running dark with no marine colors flying, arrived at Windmere's northern dock just before midnight. Luffy was already there. He'd felt it coming. Not through hockey exactly, though his observation had extended itself across the island's waters without him consciously reaching, the way breathing extended without thought. It was more instinctive than that. The feeling of something significant moving through dark water toward you, the specific gravity of a person who carried real weight in the world. He sat on the northern dock with his feet over the water and waited, and the sloop came in quiet and steady, and the man who stepped off it was not Crane. Luffy recognized him before the dock lantern's light reached his face. The hair. The way he moved, unhurried, That specific unhurried quality of a man who had never once in his life felt the need to rush because the world arranged itself around his pace rather than the other way around. Shanks. He was wearing a plain coat, dark red, no crew around him. His swords were at his hip, but his right side was empty the way it had always been empty, the sleeve pinned back, and he walked up the dock with both hands loose and looked at Luffy with those eyes, warm and deep and old with things that hadn't made it into any log pose or wanted poster. "You're getting better at observation," Shanks said. "You knew I was coming." 10 minutes ago," Luffy said. "I didn't know it was you until just now." Shanks stopped a few feet away and looked at him, really looked, the thorough unhurried assessment of someone who had last seen this person as a boy and was now doing the accounting of what the years had made. Whatever he found, it settled something in his face. Something that had been held became less held. "You look good," Shanks said. "You look old," Luffy said. Shanks laughed, the full one, the real one, the one that had always made the air feel bigger somehow. He sat down on the dock without being invited, feet over the water beside Luffy's, and looked at the southern sea where the fleet was a cluster of distant lights in the dark. 9 ships, he said. "They've been there since yesterday." "I know. I've been watching since the day before that." He looked at Luffy. "I was deciding whether to come." "What decided you?" "You going north." Shanks looked at the water. "To Kale Point. I was expecting you to dig in at the harbor, use the island as a fortress, let your crew hold the approaches. Instead you went north to get 300 people clear before the advance unit arrived." He paused. "That's not what a man does when he's trying to prove something." "I wasn't proving anything." "I know." Shanks said it quietly, with a weight that wasn't accusation. "That's why I came." They sat together for a moment, the water moving below them, dark and full of its own considerations. The fleet's lights to the south were small and still. The island behind them was quiet, most of it asleep, though Luffy knew that Zoro was awake somewhere and Robin was awake somewhere, and Nami was definitely awake because Nami slept badly when there was an unsolved problem and the fleet on their doorstep qualified. "Is this about the One Piece?" Luffy said. "It's about a lot of things. But is that one of them?" Shanks was quiet for a beat, the kind that meant yes. "I've spent years moving toward that final sea, Luffy. Things are converging. The pieces are moving. And the person who He stopped. Restarted. "The person I gave my hat to. I always imagined he'd be part of what happens at the end." Luffy looked at him. Shanks was not a man who said things he didn't mean, and he was not a man who said them easily. This was costing him something. "Are you asking me to come back?" Luffy said. "No." "Then what are you doing?" Shanks turned to look at him fully, and in the dock light his face was complicated. Not sad exactly. Something more textured than sad, the way old grief gets when it's been lived with long enough to develop character. "I'm asking if you're sure," he said. "I'm sure," Luffy said immediately. "You didn't think about it." "I don't need to think about it. I know what I chose." "I know you know." Shanks looked back at the water. "But there's a difference between knowing your choice and understanding everything it means. I want to know if you've looked at both sides of it. Not the romance of it. The whole thing." Luffy considered this. He didn't get defensive. Defensiveness had never really been part of his architecture. He considered it seriously, the way he considered all serious things, with his full attention and no performance. "What do you think I'm missing?" "Nothing, maybe." Shanks picked at a loose board on the dock idle, a habit that Luffy suddenly remembered from years ago. He'd always done it, this small fidgeting with whatever surface he was sitting on, the only outward sign of inner movement. "But when I was your age, when I had the energy and the ability, and the world laid out ahead of me, I made choices based on what I felt, fully, in that moment. And those choices were right. I don't regret most of them." He paused. "But the ones I had to live with longest were the ones that affected other people." "Nami chose this too," Luffy said. "I know she did. I didn't ask her to stop what she was doing. She still navigates." She still charts. She's. He thought about her at the kitchen table with the map spread out, the pencil behind her ear, completely alive in that work. She's exactly what she's always been. And you? Luffy was quiet for a moment. More, he said finally. I'm more. I didn't think that was possible. He said it without sentiment, just as information. I thought choosing something smaller would make me smaller. But it didn't. I don't know why. Shanks looked at him for a long time. Whatever he was looking for, he seemed to be finding most of it. What do you think the One Piece is? He said. The question landed differently than it might have, coming from anyone else. Luffy thought about it seriously. Freedom, he said. The biggest kind. Roger found it, and it proved that someone could get there. Could get to the place where there are no more ceilings on what a person can be. Yes. But I already got there, Luffy said. Quietly. Not bragging, just stating the geography of his own life as he understood it. The ceilings are gone. I can do what I want. Go where I want. Be who I want. He looked at Shanks. I want to be here. That's freedom too. The silence that followed was long and full. Shanks was processing something. Luffy could tell, not through Haki but through knowing him, the particular quality of his silences. This one had texture. You know what Roger said? Shanks said. When he got there. I've heard the stories. He laughed. Shanks smiled, but it was the complex kind, the one with history in it. Not because he was happy. Not because it was everything he'd imagined. He laughed because he finally understood that the treasure was real, but what it meant was something he'd had to figure out himself, and couldn't tell anyone. Every person has to get there and find their own meaning. He looked at Luffy. I spent years assuming your meaning would be the same as his. It's not, Luffy said. I know that now. Shanks exhaled, long, slow, the kind of breath that releases something. You know Crane is coming. Tomorrow. Before dawn, probably. He won't come with the fleet. No, Luffy agreed. That's not how he thinks. He'll come alone or nearly. He'll want to make this a conversation before it's a fight. Shanks looked at the fleet lights. He's not wrong to want that. He's just wrong about what the conversation will prove. What do you think it'll prove? Shanks was quiet for a moment. That you're not someone he can compress into a lesson. He said it with a certainty that was not performed, just present. He's built his whole model on the idea that attachment makes you smaller. That you've voluntarily reduced yourself. He's going to discover that's not what happened. You could say something to him. Luffy said. You have the pull. I could. Shanks didn't deny it. But that's not why I came. He looked at Luffy steadily. I came to see you. Not to fix your situation. You don't need me to fix anything. Luffy looked at him. Then why does it feel like a goodbye? Shanks paused. Something moved in his face, fast there and gone, but Luffy caught it because he was paying attention and he was good at catching things. Because some things are, Shanks said. Not you and me, not in the way that matters. But this version. This conversation. I won't come to your door again telling stories about what I thought your future looked like because... He made a small gesture with his single hand toward the island behind them, the sleeping houses and the garden and the house on the hill. This is your future. It's already here. And it's yours. Luffy didn't say anything. Shanks reached inside his coat and pulled something out. He held it out, an object small, folded in cloth. Luffy took it and unwrapped it, and it was a piece of paper. A chart, old and creased, with handwriting on it that he recognized from the one time he'd seen it before, Roger's handwriting. A partial map of something he couldn't place. He had more than one, Shanks said. I've been carrying this piece for 20 years. I don't know what the right thing to do with it is. He looked at Luffy. I'm not giving it to you as a mission. I'm giving it to you because it's yours more than it's mine, and you'll know what to do with it when the time comes. If the time comes. Luffy looked at the map for a moment. Then he folded it back in the cloth and put it inside his shirt, against his chest. Are you going to fight? Luffy asked. Meaning the fleet. Meaning Crane. No. Shanks stood up, brushing off his coat with the easy motion of someone rising from a conversation rather than a war council. This is your island, Luffy. Your crew. Your fight. He looked down at him one more time and there was the whole history of them in his face. The boy at the barrel, the hat, the arm, the 10 years of waiting, the grand line and everything after. Your life. He walked back down the dock toward his sloop. Luffy sat with his feet over the water and didn't call after him, because there was nothing that needed to be called. He listened to the sloop's sail catch the night wind and the quiet water sounds of it leaving, growing distant, eventually becoming just the sound of the sea itself, which was what everything eventually became. He sat there for a while after that, thinking about Roger laughing. Then he went inside. Nami was awake. Of course she was. She was at the table with a map, not a navigational chart this time, but a sketch, the island's coastline rendered in her quick, precise strokes with positions marked in pencil. The harbor approaches. The high ground. The northern dock where Shanks had just been. She looked up when he came in. She looked at his face and then said, "Shanks, how did you know?" "The observation thing. You weren't worried when you went out. You would have been different if it was Crane." She set down her pencil. "What did he want?" Luffy sat down across from her, and put his arms on the table and thought about how to say it. "To see me," he said finally. "To make sure I was okay. To say goodbye to something." He paused. "He also gave me a piece of Roger's map." Her eyes went to his shirt, where the cloth-wrapped paper was. "Luffy, I'm not going back," he said. "That's not what he gave it for." "What did he give it for?" "He said I'd know when the time comes." He thought about it. "I think it was just, he wanted it to be mine. He's been carrying it and it felt like mine." She looked at him for a long time. She had this particular way of looking at him in quiet moments, focused and open at the same time, the way a navigator looked at a sky they were reading seriously. He'd gotten used to being read like that and found he didn't mind. "Are you sad?" she said. "About what?" "Any of it. All of it." She gestured, a small motion that encompassed everything. The choice, the life, the fleet outside, Shanks on the dock, the map against his chest. He thought about it honestly because she was asking honestly, and that's what honesty required. "No," he said. "I'm a lot of things right now. But not sad." "Okay." She picked up her pencil. Looked at her sketch. "Crane's coming tomorrow." "I know. I've been looking at the island's approach vectors. If he comes from the south, he has to pass through the fleet's position, which means the fleet will see him arrive. If he comes from the east or west, he risks the current junction, bad timing, bad wind. The only clean approach that lets him arrive without the fleet knowing is the northern dock." Luffy looked at her. "The same dock where Shanks just was?" she said. "You're saying he might already know about the northern dock. I'm saying Crane does his research. He knows this island better than we do, probably." She tapped the map with her pencil. "If he comes before dawn from the north, on something small and fast, he's at the dock in," she calculated, 4 hours. 2 hours before the fleet's window. Right. He'd want to be here and done before his own fleet makes their move, because if he handles it himself he doesn't have to share credit or information. Luffy looked at the sketch. Her handwriting in the margins was small and neat, weather notations and tidal marks and approach angles. Even here, even now, she was doing the thing she did, reading the world and writing it down in a language that made it navigable. "He's going to try to talk first," Luffy said. "I know. Are you okay with that?" She looked up. "What do you mean?" "He designed a weapon for you. A specific, personal weapon." He said it evenly, not as accusation of anyone, just the fact of it. "Are you okay with me having a conversation with the man who designed that before we fight?" She was quiet for a moment. Something moved in her expression, not anger, not quite, but something adjacent to it that she was choosing carefully. "I'm okay with it," she said. Because I trust your judgment. And because having the conversation will tell us things that just fighting wouldn't. Yeah. But Luffy. Her voice was level. Make sure he understands something. What? That the weapon failed. That whatever he designed it to do, whatever message it was supposed to send about the people you love being liabilities, it failed before it was ever used. She met his eyes directly. He should know that I'm not a weakness in your life. I'm the reason you're still you. He held her gaze. Something moved in his chest, enormous and specific and entirely hers. I'll make sure he understands, he said. She nodded, looked back at the map. Get some sleep. You've got 4 hours. Are you coming to sleep? In a bit. She was already looking at the coastline sketch again, pencil moving. I want to finish this. He stood up, came around the table, stopped behind her chair. He put one hand on her shoulder, briefly, without ceremony, and then went upstairs, bending under the slanted ceiling, and lay down on the bed that was too small for someone who could stretch to any size, and closed his eyes. He was asleep in approximately 90 seconds, which was one of the things about him that still occasionally astonished people. Below, Nami sat at the kitchen table with her map and her pencil, and after a moment she reached up and covered the hand-shaped warmth on her shoulder with her own hand, holding it there for just a second against nothing but air. Then she went back to work. He arrived exactly as she had predicted. 3 hours and 40 minutes later, before the sky had made any concession toward dawn, a vessel came to the northern dock. Not a sloop this time, a fast cutter, marine design but running without colors, with 6 men at the oars and 1 man standing at the prow. Luffy was on the dock. He'd been there for 20 minutes, sitting the same way he'd sat for Shanks, feet over the water. Behind him, uphill and invisible in the dark, he knew without checking that Zoro was awake and positioned on the high ground. Robin was somewhere in the shadows of the northern settlement's edges, which were minimal, 3 buildings and a storage shed, with the calm patience of someone who had spent years in the dark and found it comfortable. Nami was at the harbor wall to the south, watching the fleet. Just Luffy on the dock waiting. The cutter came in. The 6 men held it steady while the 1 man stepped off. Admiral Crane was tall, taller than Luffy had expected, though he wasn't sure why he formed an expectation. Lean, not slight, the leanness of someone who kept themselves precisely, who understood their own instrument, and maintained it carefully. He was wearing a Marine Admiral's coat but not the traditional style, darker, simpler, without the gold trim that most of them favored. His face was interesting. That was the word that came to Luffy first. Not threatening, not cold, not the face of a cartoon villain. Interesting. He was maybe 45, with close-cut gray at the temples and eyes that were doing the same thing Luffy's were, taking in information, assessing, adjusting. He stopped on the dock and looked at Luffy. Luffy looked at him. You knew I'd come this way, Crane said. Not an accusation, just acknowledging the fact of it. My navigator knew, Luffy said. She told me. Something in Crane's expression shifted, subtle, micro, the kind of adjustment that most people wouldn't catch. He filed that information. I've read her file, he said. Nami. Former Orange Town cartographer's apprentice. Instrumental in, I know who she is, Luffy said pleasantly enough. Crane stopped. He understood the signal. He changed approaches the way water changed directions, smoothly, no wasted movement. You know why I'm here. You want to see if I'm what your intelligence reports say I am. Luffy looked at him. Which I'm not. No? Your reports probably say I'm dangerous but diminished. Retired. That I chose love over ambition and that makes me predictable. He paused. None of that's right. Crane looked at him for a long moment. He had still hands, not nervous still, intentionally still, the stillness of someone who'd learned that physical control communicated authority. My reports say you're the most dangerous living pirate. That you single-handedly restructured the balance of power in the new world at Onigashima. That your devil fruit awakening puts you in a category of threat assessment that has no precedent. He paused. They also say you walked away from the most significant pirate odyssey in living history to live on a fishing island in a house with a broken garden gate. Luffy glanced at the garden gate. He really should fix that. The left side of the garden is good, he said. Crane blinked. It was small and involuntary and might have been the first completely involuntary thing his face had done all night. Sit down, Luffy said. Crane looked at the dock. He looked at Luffy. He sat down. He did not put his feet over the water the way Luffy had, but he sat, which was something. Luffy looked at the dark sea and let the quiet last for a moment because he wasn't in a hurry and he'd learned that the right silence at the right moment told you more about a person than most questions. You were a revolutionary, Luffy said. For 6 years. Why did you leave? Crane looked at the water. That's a longer answer than this conversation needs. Give me the short version. A pause. Crane was deciding how honest to be, and Luffy could read the decision-making in the set of his jaw, the small tension above his collar. He settled on more honest than expected, which suggested he was either confident enough that honesty couldn't hurt him, or he was someone who genuinely couldn't sustain dishonesty as a strategy. Luffy suspected the second. Because I realized the revolutionaries were as dogmatic as what they opposed, Crane said. They believed that the world could only be changed through total rupture. That the existing order had to be destroyed completely before something better could grow. He looked at the fleet lights to the south. I believed them for 6 years. Then I stopped believing them. But I didn't stop believing in order. In stability. In the idea that people need structure to be safe. So you switched sides. I chose a different method toward a goal I still hold. His voice was precise and not defensive. The goal is a world where ordinary people are safe. Where the chaos of the sea doesn't reach into villages and kill families. That's my goal too, Luffy said. Crane looked at him. It was a sharp look, not hostile, but genuinely assessing. You think so? I know so. The difference is you think structure creates safety. I think people create safety. He looked at Crane directly. You think controlling powerful people makes the world safer. I think freeing people to be themselves is the same thing. That's a convenient philosophy for someone who doesn't want to be controlled. It's convenient because it's right, Luffy said without heat. Crane was quiet for a moment. He was doing the thing that intelligent people did in uncomfortable conversations, checking his own model against incoming data, updating, recalibrating. You know what you represent, he said. To the people in those villages. The ones you think your philosophy protects. What do I represent? Possibility. The word came out with a complicated weight. The idea that a person can simply choose to be extraordinary. That power doesn't flow from institutions, it flows from individual will. That any person, at any moment, could decide to be Monkey D. Luffy. He looked at Luffy. Do you understand why that's dangerous? It's not dangerous, Luffy said. It's just true. It's dangerous because most of the people inspired by it don't have your abilities. They see your example and they reach, and when they fall, there's no structure to catch them. No institution. Just the sea. Something moved in his voice that wasn't quite passion but was the ghost of it. I've seen villages destroyed by men who decided to be extraordinary. By pirates who were inspired by exactly the kind of freedom you represent. Luffy was quiet for a moment. He looked at the water. Have you seen what villages look like when Marines come through? He said. The silence between them changed texture. I know the institution isn't clean, Crane said. Carefully. It's not about clean. It's about who decides. Luffy looked at him. You said ordinary people need structure to be safe. But what if the structure is what's hurting them? You think you can fix it from inside. Maybe you're right. But you're still asking people to trust a structure that has spent a long time proving it doesn't deserve that trust. He paused. I'm not asking anyone to trust me. I'm just being what I am. People get to make their own choices about what that means. Crane was looking at him with an expression that had shifted, not defeated, not convinced, but genuinely engaged, genuinely present in the conversation in a way that he probably hadn't expected to be when he stepped off the cutter. You understand that I can't let you continue to exist as a symbol, he said. Retired or not. The inspiration you represent is destabilizing regardless of your personal intentions. You can try, Luffy said. Simply. No threat in it, no swagger, just a flat statement of a fact. I brought 9 warships. I know. And a weapon designed specifically to, I broke it, Luffy said. Whatever it would have done to Nami, I broke it before it got near her. He looked at Crane, and for the first time there was something in his voice that was not quite anger but was the thing that lived in the same house as anger, and was sometimes harder to face. That's the thing I need you to understand. You designed something to hurt her specifically. Not because she's a threat. Because you thought she was the soft part of me. Crane was very still. She's not, Luffy said. She's the reason I'm still standing here having this conversation instead of just ending the fleet and going back to bed. He held Crane's gaze with the steady, unblinking attention that had unnerved people far more fearsome than a Marine Admiral. She makes me think before I act. She makes me see the people in the ships instead of just the ships. She makes me consider whether there's a better way. He paused. She's not a weakness. She's the best part of how I think. Something moved in Crane's face. Complex, genuine, unexpected. He looked away, at the water, the fleet lights, the dark eastern sky where dawn hadn't started yet. You know I have to continue, he said. Not a threat. Almost an apology. The mission doesn't stop because a conversation was better than I expected. I know, Luffy said. But the conversation was the thing. Now we both know where we stand. Yes. Crane was quiet. What happens now? Now you go back to your cutter. And I go back to my crew. Luffy stood up. And if you come again, with the fleet, with a new weapon, with whatever Phase 2 looks like, I'll be here. Exactly as I am. Not hiding. Not scared. Not smaller than I was before I chose this life. He started to walk back up the dock toward the island. Luffy, Crane said. Luffy stopped. He hadn't used his name before. He turned. Crane was looking at him from the dock, still seated, and in the dark before dawn he looked like something different than an admiral. Like a man who'd been carrying a heavy model of the world for a very long time and had just been handed evidence that the model was wrong about at least one thing, and was deciding what to do about that. The hat, Crane said, looking at the straw hat at Luffy's back. You carry it everywhere. Even here. Even retired. Yeah. Why? Luffy reached back, touched the brim of it without taking it off. Shanks's hat. Roger's world. Everything that had happened between a barrel and a coastal village and this dock, right now. Because it's mine, he said. And some things you carry because they're part of you. Not because they're a burden. Not because you're obligated. He looked at Crane. Because you want to. He walked off the dock. Robin was waiting at the edge of the northern settlement, arms folded, as she always was in places where waiting was required, completely comfortable with it, as though she'd invented the concept. Well, she said, when Luffy reached her. He's smart, Luffy said. Genuinely. Not just tactically. He actually believes what he's doing. Does that change anything? No. He thought about it. But it means the fight is going to be different than a fight with someone who's just following orders. He's coming back. He said as much. Robin nodded, processing. They walked back together through the dark island, the sleeping houses, the empty main street with its smooth stones. There's something else, she said. Yeah? I've been working the Den relay since midnight. I found something in Crane's operational file, a secondary objective. She said it with her particular quality of care, the one she used for things that require delicacy. Crane doesn't want to capture or kill you, Luffy. You already knew that. What I found is why. Tell me. He wants to hold a public tribunal. bring you before a convened court of the world government and argue, formally, on record, that your existence, retired or not, constitutes an ongoing threat to global stability. Robin looked at him. He wants to prove the argument in a recognized institutional forum. He wants to make it law that someone like you cannot simply choose to exist outside the system. Luffy stopped walking. If he wins that argument legally, Robin continued, it sets a precedent. Not just for you. For everyone who draws inspiration from the idea that a person can simply be free. She paused. It would make freedom itself illegal. Not through force, through jurisprudence. He stood in the middle of Windmere's main street in the dark before dawn and thought about that. Freedom made illegal. Not the fighting kind, not the piracy kind, the quiet kind. The choosing kind. The living on a small island with a garden and a navigator and a dock full of unbothered fish. That kind. That's his real weapon, Luffy said. Yes. The fleet. The targeted device. Kale Point. All of it was building to this. He thought about it, turning it over. He wanted to provoke a response from me that he could use as evidence in the tribunal. Unprovoked marine action on a retired civilian. If I fought back, you'd confirm that you're still an active threat, Robin said. And if you didn't fight back, the fleet would have eventually reached the island and either harm civilians or force you to flee, which would demonstrate that your supposed retirement was untenable. She looked at him calmly. He built a situation where any response you gave could be framed as evidence for his argument. Except the response I actually gave, Luffy said. Robin almost smiled. You protected civilians. You let the scout go. You went north to clear Kale Point before the advance unit arrived. You had a conversation with him on a dock instead of fighting. She paused. That's not the behavior of an unpredictable threat. That's the behavior of someone who is specifically, deliberately choosing how to use their power. Yeah, Luffy said. I know. So his evidence is compromised before the tribunal even begins. If there is a tribunal. There will be, she said quietly. He's committed too far to step back. But the shape of it will be different from what he planned. She looked at him. He came here expecting to find someone who had diminished. Who the love had made small. Instead he found me. Luffy said. Yes. She said it simply, as a complete answer. Exactly you? He nodded. He looked at the sky to the east where the darkness was starting to thin at the very edge, not quite dawn but the precursor of it, the suggestion of the sun before the sun arrived. Is Nami still on the harbor wall? She was 30 minutes ago. He went to the harbor wall. She was still there. She'd pulled her coat tighter against the pre-dawn cool and she was sitting on the wall itself, not behind it, on top of it, feet on the harbor side, which meant she'd been watching the fleet rather than sheltering from it. The climate act was across her knees. She had a flask of something warm in her hand that she'd clearly made at some point in the night and brought down with her. She heard him coming and didn't turn around immediately, which meant she'd sensed it was him, which meant she'd been listening for his particular footstep. He sat on the wall beside her. She handed him the flask without looking at him. He drank from it. It was tea, very strong, the way she made it when she was working long hours. He handed it back. How did it go? She said. Good. Good or good like you think it went well but you're glossing over the complicated parts? He thought about it. Both. She looked at the fleet. The lights were still there, still quiet. The eastern sky was graying now at the very edge. He's a true believer, she said. Not a question. Yeah. But his belief is in something real. Safety. Order. People not dying because someone powerful decided they didn't matter. Luffy looked at the fleet. He's just wrong about how you get there. People usually are, she said. They sat on the harbor wall as the dark thinned and the first gray came and the stars started to go out one by one in the way they always did, the westward ones first, then the rest, reluctant and beautiful. The fleet on the water was becoming more visible, 9 shapes sharpening out of the dark as the light built. He's going to try a tribunal, Luffy said. She was quiet for a moment. Robin told me. Just now, on the Denver. What do you think? She looked at the fleet for a long time. At the water. At the sky going from gray to pale gold at its eastern edge. I think, she said carefully, that a tribunal is actually the best thing that could happen. He looked at her. How? Because it's public. She turned to look at him, and there was something in her face, that sharp, clear focus that was her at her most genuinely formidable. The navigator's mind applied to something bigger than routes and winds. Everything he's done here, the fleet, the weapon, Cale Point, has been relatively contained. Quiet. The world government can manage the narrative if it stays quiet. She gestured at the fleet. But a tribunal is public record. Open proceedings. And the record will show exactly what Crane did here. A retired civilian on a small island, a Marine Admiral dispatching 9 warships and a targeted personal weapon, and the civilian in question spending the engagement protecting the local population and talking to an admiral on a dock. Luffy started to understand where she was going. He wants to put your existence on trial, Nami said. But the trial will also be a record of what the world government thinks justifies sending a fleet to a fishing island. She looked at him. And the world is going to read that record. You want to go to the tribunal? He said. I want to use the tribunal, she said. Yes. He looked at her. He looked at the fleet. He looked at the dawn coming up gold and specific and indifferent to all of it. Okay, he said. Okay? Let's go to the tribunal. She turned back to the water. Something settled in her face, satisfaction, not victory, the quieter kind. She lifted the flask of tea and drank from it, and the morning came in fully around them, and the 9 ships on the water caught the new light on their sides and the fleet looked, briefly, almost beautiful. I love this island, she said quietly. Me too. He looked at it, the rooftops, the weathered buildings, Greta's corner, the path up to the house and the broken gate and the half-dead garden. We're coming back when this is done. Obviously, she said. I mean it. I know you mean it. She glanced at him sideways. That's why I said obviously. The morning held them there on the harbor wall, the sea enormous and bright ahead, the island quiet and stubborn at their backs, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, the fleet and the admiral and the tribunal waiting and the map against his chest. Luffy was as completely himself as he had ever been. Choosing, fully and freely, exactly this. Chapter 5. The world decides. The summons arrived by official marine courier 3 days later. Not the skull and bones kind of message that pirates send each other. No threats, no flourishes, no chest-pounding language about power and consequence. It was a bureaucratic document, precisely worded, stamped with 3 different world government seals and countersigned by 2 cipher pole representatives whose names Luffy didn't recognize. The paper was thick and cream-colored and the kind of official that was designed to feel heavy in your hands. Robin read it aloud to the assembled crew on the Sunny's deck while the morning was still deciding what temperature to be. The tribunal was convened for 10 days hence. Location: Marine Headquarters, G1 Judicial Complex, Formal Proceedings Chamber. The subject of inquiry: the ongoing status of Monkey D. Luffy, formerly designated Yonko, currently self-described civilian, as pertains to the question of whether said individual's continued unregulated existence constitutes an actionable threat to global civil order under Maritime Statute 7, Article 12. Admiral Crane presiding as petitioner. World Government representative serving as adjudicator. Attendance was, and this was the part that the document probably thought was a trump card, mandatory. Failure to appear would be treated as evidence of hostile intent and responded to accordingly. Robin folded the paper when she finished and placed it on the Sunny's railing with the precision of someone setting down something that had already been analyzed completely. Silence. Then Usopp said, "They want us to walk into Marine Headquarters." "G1," Frankie said, and whistled low. "That's not a standard base. That's the big one. It's the most heavily fortified marine installation in the world," Jinbe said, which he delivered not as a warning but as context. the way he delivered most things. "I know what it is," Luffy said. He was leaning against the mast with his arms folded and the straw hat low over his eyes, which was his thinking position, and everyone who knew him well enough recognized it and waited. "We're going," he said. Sanji lit a cigarette. "Obviously. I want to be clear about what we're going to do when we get there," Luffy continued. "We're not going to fight our way in. We're not going to break anything on arrival." He glanced at Frankie. "Or modify anything." Frankie looked mildly offended. "I wasn't going to. You were already thinking about the dock infrastructure," Robin said. Frankie closed his mouth. "We walk in," Luffy said. "We sit at their table. And we let Crane make his argument." He lifted his head and looked around at the crew, all of them, the whole shape of them arrayed on the Sunny's deck in the morning light. "And then we make ours." Zoro, who had been sitting on the stairs to the upper deck, said, "And when they decide wrong?" "They won't," Nami said. Zoro looked at her. "You can't know that." "Yes, I can." She was standing at the railing with the summons in her hand now, turning it over once. "Crane's evidence is compromised. He knows it," Robin confirmed it. "The Marine fleet at Windmere, the weapon, Kale Point, all of it creates a picture that doesn't support his argument. The adjudicator will see it." She set the paper down. "But more importantly, the whole thing is public record. Even if they decide against us in the room, it goes into the world. Every journalist, every civilian correspondent, every den operator that covers official proceedings will have the transcript. She's been planning this since the morning after the dock conversation," Robin said, with the mild appreciation of one strategist identifying another. Nami didn't deny it. "We're not just going to a tribunal. We're going to put Crane's argument in front of the world and let the world read it." She looked at Luffy. This was always the third option. He looked at her. "You could have said something earlier. You were going to agree anyway." "I waited until I'd worked out the details." Chopper raised his hoof. "I have a question." "Go ahead, Chopper," Luffy said. "What if the adjudicator is one of Crane's people? What if the whole thing is already decided?" The question sat in the air. It was a good question, the kind that came from genuine worry rather than pessimism. Chopper's fear was always clean like that, specific, real, without ego in it. "Then we find out in public," Luffy said. "And the world finds out what that looks like too." Chopper nodded slowly, processing. "Then, okay. I trust you." It was simple. Unqualified. And Luffy received it the way he received all direct trust, seriously, without deflecting it or performing humility about it. He nodded back. "When do we leave?" Brooks said. "Tomorrow morning," Nami said. "I've plotted the route. 7 days on the current heading with favorable wind, which means we arrive a day before the tribunal with time to prepare." She looked around. "Use today to rest. Eat properly." "Sanji, already on it," Sanji said, moving toward the galley before she'd finished the sentence. The crew dispersed into the comfortable motion of a ship preparing to go somewhere. Luffy stayed at the mast for another moment, looking south, at the open water, at the horizon where the fleet had been. The 9 ships had pulled out the morning after the dock conversation with Crane. Not fled, withdrawn with the deliberate efficiency of a force that had received new orders and was executing them. Crane was done with the Windmere approach. He'd gotten what he needed. Or what he thought he needed. Luffy looked at the horizon and thought about the tribunal and felt something that was neither dread nor excitement, but the particular tension between them that came before things that actually mattered. He was ready. 7 days at sea. The Sunny moved through the Grand Line's complicated waters with the ease of a ship that had done it 1,000 times, and the crew fell back into the rhythm of ocean travel the way bodies fell back into old habits, muscle memory, comfortable and automatic. Watch rotations. Meals in the galley that were, because it was Sanji's galley, consistently extraordinary. Evening on deck when the weather allowed. Chopper falling asleep wherever he happened to be sitting around hour 8 of any quiet day. Luffy spent most of the time at the bow. Not thinking, exactly, not in the way Robin thought, deliberate and structured. Just present. The water moving under the Sunny's hull, the wind from the northwest, the specific quality of Grand Line air that tasted different from any other ocean's air and always had. He'd missed this. Not with the sharp ache of deprivation, but with the quiet recognition of something good that he'd temporarily set aside. The sea was still the sea. It still pulled. It still felt like the most alive place in the world. On the fourth day, Nami found him there in the late afternoon and sat beside him without announcing herself, which she'd started doing recently, just arriving, settling, being present without requiring acknowledgement, the way you were comfortable with something you trusted completely. "Tell me something," she said. "About what?" "About how you're actually doing." She looked at him sideways. Not the default answer. The real one. He thought about it seriously. The sun was going west over the water and the light was that particular red-orange that only happened when the atmosphere was right and it turned everything it touched warm. "I feel good," he said. "Like before a fight. The right kind of tense. Not scared." "No." He paused. "Are you?" She was quiet for a moment. The ship moved under them, the familiar living motion of wood and sail on ocean. "I'm scared that I'm the reason this is happening," she said. "That if you'd stayed on the ship, stayed on the path, Crane wouldn't have had anything to compress. He'd have found something else." Luffy said immediately. "I'd still be a symbol. The fleet would still come eventually." "You don't know that." "I know him," Luffy said. "We talked for an hour on that dock. A man who thinks the way he thinks, the compression thing, the argument he's building, he wasn't making that argument against a man still chasing the One Piece. He was making it against the idea that someone like me could choose something quiet." He looked at her. "The choice is what threatened him. Not me. If I'd still been sailing, I'd have been an active pirate, and he'd have handled that differently." She absorbed this. "So by choosing this I gave him the specific argument he was looking for. By choosing this I gave him an argument he couldn't beat," Luffy said. She looked at him. "Think about it," he said. "A retired pirate living quietly on a fishing island, protecting the local civilians, talking to admirals on docks before fighting them, that's his evidence? That's the threat to global stability?" He almost smiled. He found the worst possible version of me to put on trial. Something shifted in her face, the particular expression she wore when she'd been holding a worry and someone had just taken it apart carefully in front of her and shown her its insides. Not relief exactly. More like the adjustment of a navigator who'd been tracking a dangerous current and had just found it was smaller than the chart suggested. "You've been thinking about this," she said. "I think about things," he said, which was not entirely untrue even if it surprised people. She looked at the water for a moment. Then she leaned her head against his shoulder, just briefly, just a moment, the kind of contact that didn't need anything from either of them. He stayed very still, not making anything of it. "We're going to be okay," she said. "Yeah," he said. "I'm not asking. I'm telling you. I know." She straightened up and looked at the horizon again, professional and present. "Dinner in 20 minutes. I know. Don't be late." "I'm never late." "You're always late." "I'm always exactly on time for when the food is ready." She stood up and walked back down the deck, and he could hear the almost laugh she was suppressing by the rhythm of her footsteps. G1 was built the way things were built when power wanted to make sure you understood it before you walked through the door. The complex rose out of the ocean on a manufactured island, engineered, not natural, the kind of construction that took enormous resources and was designed specifically to communicate that enormous resources existed and had been spent here. The walls were high and white and thick. The towers were functional rather than decorative, bristling with observation equipment and cannon emplacements that were not hidden because the point of them was to be seen. The harbor could accommodate the largest warships in the Marine fleet simultaneously, and it was currently accommodating several of them, their flags hanging in the still morning air. The Sunny came in on the main approach, sails fully deployed, the lion figurehead catching the morning light and giving it back warm and golden, and the harbor watch saw them coming from 10 minutes out, and the news moved through the base the way news moved through closed systems, fast, compressing, arriving at decision-makers before anyone had quite decided what to do about it. They let them dock. Luffy had expected that. Crane had invited them. Turning away the invited guest at the door was not the kind of move a man building a formal legal argument would make. A Marine captain met them at the dock. Young, professional, not visibly afraid, which was a point in his favor. He gave them escort numbers, formal passes, the bureaucratic equivalent of guest badges, and explained the proceedings schedule with the clipped efficiency of someone who was doing his job exactly right and was aware that the crew on this ship could destroy the entire complex if they chose to and was choosing to behave as though that were not the case. Luffy appreciated the professionalism. The crew walked through Marine headquarters in a loose formation that was not quite military and not quite casual, the natural spacing of people who moved together and trusted each other's peripheral awareness. Marines watched from doorways and corridors. Not threateningly. Watching the way you watched something you'd heard about for years and were now seeing and were updating your information accordingly. Usopp was managing his reaction to the base's scale through the medium of increasingly elaborate commentary delivered very quietly to Chopper, who was not helping because his eyes were very wide and he kept grabbing Usopp's arm. Frankie was looking at the structural engineering with undisguised professional interest. Brooke was humming something. Zoro had his hand on Watto's handle with the automatic comfort of long habit, not a threat, just the way he existed in spaces where something might happen. Sanji walked with his hands in his pockets and his jaw set and the expression of someone cataloging every potential exit without appearing to. Robin walked like she owned the place, which was her default mode in all locations. Jinbe walked like the sea walked, inevitable, unimpressed, present. Nami was at Luffy's left, close but not leaning, charts rolled under her arm that she'd insisted on bringing. When he'd asked why, she'd said, "Because I always bring what I need," which was answer enough. The judicial complex was separate from the main base infrastructure, a formal building, the kind built to host proceedings that the world government wanted on record. Real chambers, not interrogation rooms. High ceilings. A public gallery that today was, Luffy looked when they entered, full. Not just Marines. Journalists, civilian observers, representatives from island governments across the Grand Line. There were flag observers from at least 6 nations he recognized. There were Den transmitters set up at the press positions, the slug communicators that would carry the proceedings to receiving stations across the world in real time. The gallery was full because the world was watching. He looked at Nami and she looked back with the expression of someone whose plan was proceeding. Crane was already at the petitioner's table when they entered. He stood when Luffy walked in, not deference, just the formal acknowledgement of a man who understood that proceedings had decorum and decorum had meaning. He was in full admiral's regalia today, the coat and the bearing and the complete self-possession of someone who had prepared for this the way he prepared for everything, thoroughly, without illusion. He met Luffy's eyes across the chamber. Luffy met his. Something passed between them, the particular acknowledgement of 2 people who had sat on a dock at midnight and said real things and were now in a room where real things would have to survive formality. The adjudicator was an elderly woman named Fleet Admiral Emerita, who had been retired from active command for 6 years and was apparently the world government's preferred choice for proceedings that required someone both inside the system and sufficiently independent of it to maintain credibility. She had white hair and the kind of face that had been carrying authority for so long it had become structural. She looked at Crane, looked at Luffy, and looked at the room with the unhurried assessment of someone who had been in this building 100 times and found it neither impressive nor diminished by familiarity. "We begin," she said. Not loudly. She didn't need to be loud. Crane's argument was good. Luffy had expected it to be, and it was. He built it in careful layers over the first hour of proceedings, the history of piracy as a destabilizing force, the specific impact of Yonko-class individuals on civil populations, the mathematical relationship between a known powerful figure's existence and the frequency of opportunistic violence by lesser actors who used that existence as justification or inspiration. He cited specific islands, specific death counts, specific economic collapses in the wake of power vacuums created by Yonko conflicts. He was not wrong about any of the facts. That was the hard part. The facts were real. The harm was real. The logical chain he was constructing from those facts was clean and internally consistent. And then, careful as a surgeon, he turned to Luffy specifically. The subject's retirement does not eliminate the threat he poses as a symbol, Crane said, addressing the adjudicator with the precise diction of someone who had rehearsed this exact argument many times. If anything, it amplifies it. An active pirate can be confronted, contained, or defeated. A retired one who cannot be engaged without the world government appearing to persecute a civilian becomes. He paused, deliberate. Untouchable. A permanent inspiration to every person who believes that the system has no authority over individual will. He paused again, letting the room hold it. I want to be clear, he continued. I am not arguing that Monkey D. Luffy is a violent threat in his current state. I am arguing that the idea of him, freely chosen, freely lived, answerable to no authority, is a structural threat to the concept of civil order itself. He looked at Yua. The law must be able to reach everyone. If it cannot reach him, it sends a message that it cannot reach anyone powerful enough to defy it. Yua listened through all of this without expression, her hands folded on the table in front of her, her attention moving between Crane and the room with the careful equidistance of someone keeping her scales level. When Crane finished, she turned to Luffy. The petitioner has concluded his opening argument. Do you wish to respond? Luffy stood up. Nami had spent 3 of the 7 sailing days preparing this with him. Not the formal language, that wasn't him, and they both knew trying to make it him would be worse than useless. But the shape of it, the sequence, the thing they needed the room and the listening world to understand. He stood in front of the assembled chamber, and the full gallery, and the den transmitters, and he did not perform anything. He just spoke. Everything Crane said about the harm piracy causes is right, he said. I know because I've seen it. I grew up in a village that got hurt by pirates. I've sailed past islands that were destroyed by people who thought power was a reason to take whatever they wanted. He paused. I've fought those people. My crew has fought those people. Not because we were paid to. Not because an institution told us to. Because it was wrong and we could do something about it. The chamber was very quiet. Crane thinks the danger is the idea that people can be powerful outside the system, Luffy continued. But that's not the idea I'm inspiring. The thing that people see in me, if they see anything, is that you can fight for what you actually care about. Not for a title. Not for a system. Not for an institution that may or may not protect you depending on whether you're useful to it. He looked at Yua. People took inspiration from me because I protected them when I didn't have to. Because I chose to fight for places that had nothing to give me. He glanced briefly at Crane. He brought 9 ships to Windmere Island. I live there. Population, 800 fishing people who have never harmed anyone. He said it simply, without drama. He brought a weapon specifically designed to affect a person close to me. Not to subdue me. Not to arrest me. To hurt something I loved and see if that made me easier to control. He let that sit in the room. I want the record to show what he had to do to build his case. Because if the argument requires 9 ships and a personal weapon aimed at a civilian woman in order to produce evidence, then the argument isn't as strong as it sounds in here. Something moved through the gallery. Not loud, a shift, the collective adjustment of people who had been listening to one version of a story and had just received new information. Nami's hand, under the table, found his wrist. He felt it and stayed still. I'm not asking to be above the law, he said. I'm asking the law to look at what it did to get me into this room. And decide if that's the kind of law it wants to be. He sat down. Yua was quiet for a moment. Then, the petitioner may respond. Crane stood. Whatever he had prepared for this moment, And he had prepared, he was always prepared. He looked at Luffy for half a second before he began, and in that half second something moved in his face that he controlled immediately and completely. But Luffy saw it. Crane's response was precise and even and technically argued, returning to the structural points, rebuilding the logical wall that Luffy had put a door through. He was good. He was genuinely good at this. But the room had changed. The gallery had heard both versions now, and the Den transmitters were carrying both versions, and the facts about Windmere were in the record. 9 ships. 800 civilians. A weapon for Nami. Those facts were in the record and they weren't coming out. The recess lasted 2 hours. The crew waited in an anteroom that had been provided, the marine equivalent of a waiting room, functional, without the pretense of comfort. Sanji had somehow acquired food from somewhere within the first 20 minutes, which Luffy did not investigate. Chopper was going back and forth between anxious and determinedly calm. Usopp was telling Frankie about a technique he was definitely going to use if things went wrong, which was getting more elaborate with each telling. Brook was very quietly playing something sad and then catching himself and shifting to something else. Zoro was asleep. Robin was reading. Luffy sat on the floor with his back against the wall and his hat over his face and thought about Shanks on the dock, about Roger laughing, about the piece of map against his chest. He thought about Greta and her eel cart and the bad wheel. He thought about the left side of the garden, which was doing genuinely well. Nami sat beside him on the floor, unusual for her, floor sitting not being her standard posture, and said nothing, which was also unusual, which meant the nothing was itself a kind of communication. He lifted the hat off his face. She was looking at the door. "Whatever they decide in there," she said. "Yeah. The record exists. Yeah. The world heard it. Yeah." He looked at her. "Are you working yourself up to something?" She turned to look at him. "No. I'm working myself down from something." She paused. "I was sitting in there listening to Crane and I was angry. Really angry. Not about me, about the weapon, though yes, obviously about that, but about the argument. The idea that freedom has to be permitted. That it's only valid if an institution validates it." Her voice was even, but the feeling under it was substantial, the way deep water was substantial even when the surface was calm. "It made me angry that the argument is so clean. That you can make oppression sound like reason if you choose the right words." "Yeah," Luffy said. "That's been true for a long time. I know it has." She exhaled. "I just hate it." He thought about what to say and then decided the thing he actually thought was the right thing. "Crane believes it," he said. "He's not performing it. He actually thinks what he's saying is right. And that matters because—" He paused, sorting through it. "You can be smart and believe something wrong. You can care about people and still build something that hurts them. That doesn't mean you give up on trying to be right. It means you stay honest about what you see." She looked at him. "Windmere is real," he said. "Kale Point is real. The fact that I talked to him on the dock is real. We didn't perform any of that. We just did what was right. And that's in the record." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "When did you get wise?" "I've always been wise," he said. She made a sound that was categorically a laugh despite her evident intention to make a different sound. "You ate a live fish last week because you were bored. That's different." "In what possible?" The door opened. The Marine captain who'd met them at the dock appeared, professional and unhurried. "The adjudicator is ready." Yua looked different when they filed back in. Not physically, she was exactly as she'd been before the recess, white-haired and square-shouldered and occupying her seat with the authority of long tenure. But something in the room's atmosphere had changed, the way a room changed after a decision had been made but before it was announced. The gallery was quiet. The Den transmitters had their operators sitting forward slightly. Crane was at his table, hands folded, his face the carefully managed neutral of a man who had played out every scenario and was waiting to see which one arrived. Yua looked at her documents. Then at the room. Then she looked at Luffy with the direct, assessing attention of someone who had spent the last 2 hours thinking about something complicated and had arrived somewhere. This tribunal was convened on the question of whether Monkey D. Luffy's continued unregulated existence constitutes an actionable threat to civil order under Maritime Statute 7, Article 12. She said. Her voice was even, deliberate, every word placed with intention. I have reviewed the petitioner's argument, the subject's response, and the documentary evidence submitted by both parties. She paused. The petitioner's argument is legally coherent and internally consistent. The concern he identifies, that unregulated individual power creates systemic risk, is a legitimate concern with genuine supporting evidence. She looked at Crane. I want the record to reflect that the petitioner's position is not frivolous. Crane nodded once, controlled. However, Yua set down the paper she'd been holding and folded her hands on the table. The question before this tribunal is not whether powerful individuals create risk in the abstract. The question is whether this specific individual's specific conduct constitutes an actionable threat. She looked at the room. The evidentiary record includes the following facts. 1. The subject has been residing peacefully on Windmere Island for 3 months without incident of any kind. 2. In response to the Marine Fleet's approach, the subject's primary observable action was the evacuation of local civilians to a position of safety. 3. The subject personally traveled to Kale Point to clear that settlement's civilian population before the advance unit's arrival, demonstrating deliberate protection of non-combatants. She paused. 4. The subject engaged in direct conversation with the petitioner rather than initiating combat. And 5. The weapon designated Designation 7, a device not publicly disclosed and whose operational parameters raise significant questions this tribunal is not positioned to adjudicate today, was destroyed before deployment. The room was very still. The evidentiary record does not support a finding of actionable threat. Yua said. Under Maritime Statute 7, Article 12, actionable threat requires demonstrated hostile intent towards civil populations or established governance structures. The record demonstrates the opposite. The subject's conduct demonstrates consistent and active protection of civilians. She looked directly at Crane. I find against the petition. The gallery erupted. Not all at once, a wave, starting at the civilian observers and moving through the room, voices and the sounds of people reacting to something they'd been watching carefully, and had just received the resolution of. The Den operators were speaking quickly into their transmitters. Journalists were already writing. Crane sat very still through all of it, hands folded, face neutral. He was processing. Luffy could see it, not defeat exactly, not what defeat looked like in a person who never truly expected easy victory. Something more complicated. The recalibration of a man who had built a model and watched the world decline to fit it. Yua added over the room's noise, with the authority that did not need volume. I would further note for the record that the petition's evidentiary basis, which required deploying a fleet of 9 warships and an experimental personal weapon against a civilian island, raises procedural questions that I am formally referring to the Oversight Commission. That referral is binding and will be pursued. The last sentence hit the room differently than the first decision. It was the second door in the wall that Crane had built, opening from an unexpected direction. His jaw moved. Almost imperceptible. Luffy looked at him across the room. Crane looked back. The hallway outside the chamber was controlled chaos. People moving, voices overlapping, the noise of a significant event distributing itself through the bodies of the people who'd witnessed it. The crew found each other naturally, gravitating together the way they always did, and Usopp was saying something loudly about his role in the whole thing, which was creative but not entirely factual, and nobody corrected him because this was Usopp, and some things were load-bearing fiction. Chopper was crying, which he'd probably deny later. Brooke was playing the violin softly in the corner because he'd apparently brought it into the tribunal somehow. Frankie had his sunglasses on, which he always did when he was having feelings he didn't want to display. Zoro hadn't changed expression, but he'd uncrossed his arms, which was his version of celebration. Sanji produced, from somewhere inside his jacket, A small bottle of something good. He looked at it, looked at Luffy, and handed it to him. You can have the first drink, he said. Just this once. Luffy drank from it. It was warm and good, and he didn't know what it was and didn't ask. He handed it to Nami, who took a measured sip with the expression of someone evaluating quality, and then passed it to Jinbe, who looked at it with the slow appreciation of a man who understood ceremony. Jinbe drank, passed it on, and said, "The sea is not finished with you," with the particular tone of someone completing a thought they'd started a long time ago, and had now resolved. You keep saying that, Luffy said. Because it keeps being true. Jinbe looked at him. But today I think I finally understand what it means. The sea is not finished with you because you are the kind of person the world keeps needing. Not to conquer it. Not to be king of it. He paused. Simply to be in it. Robin was not in the immediate group. Luffy looked around and found her, standing a little apart, watching the hallway. Her expression was the careful one, the observing one, gathering information that might matter. He moved to stand beside her. What? He said. Crane, she said quietly. He hasn't left the chamber. Luffy looked toward the chamber door. He's regrouping. Possibly. Or, she paused. I want to talk to him. He looked at her. Why? Because the oversight referral is a problem for him, but it's also a door, she said. The designation 7 weapon, the referral means it goes into public record. Its purpose, its targeting parameters, all of it. That's significant. Not just for us. For anyone the world government has ever used something like that against. She looked at Luffy. Crane knows that. He's going to be deciding right now whether that referral creates a bigger problem than it solves. You want to see which way he goes. I want to see if there's something there, she said. He was a revolutionary, Luffy. For 6 years, he was on the right side of things. People don't lose all of that just by switching institutions. It gets buried sometimes. But it doesn't disappear. He thought about the dock. About the way Crane had said he's not interested in a fair fight through Voss's careful, costly words. About the conversation at midnight, the man who had said the short version and then given something honest anyway. Go talk to him, Luffy said. She went. He watched her walk back toward the chamber door, precise and unhurried, and he thought that Robin was probably the most formidable person he'd ever met in the specific way that formidable meant able to move through the world and change it without anyone quite seeing how. He turned back to his crew. The hallway was still loud around them, the residual noise of the decision moving outward through the building, through the den transmitters, out into the world. He thought about all the people receiving it. The islands and the villages and the people who lived in them, who would read the transcript, or hear the summary from someone who had and would form their own understanding of what it meant. A retired pirate went to a tribunal and won. Not by fighting. Not by threatening. By showing up and telling the truth about what had happened, and letting the record speak. He thought about what Crane had said on the dock. The idea of him. The symbol. The inspiration. He thought about what that inspiration would look like now, after today. Not just you can be powerful and free. But you can be powerful and free and responsible. You can be enormous and choose specific things. You can carry a straw hat and live on a small island and protect 800 fishing people and then walk into Marine headquarters and tell the truth without flinching and walk back out again. That was the idea. That was what the world was going to receive today. Crane came out of the chamber 20 minutes later. He came out alone, which meant he'd dismissed whatever staff had been with him, which meant he wanted to move through the hallway without an audience. He didn't quite succeed at that because the hallway still had Luffy's crew in it, and Robin had apparently been waiting by the door, and fell into step beside him with the unassuming ease of someone joining a walk they'd been invited to. Luffy watched from across the hallway. He couldn't hear what they were saying, too much ambient noise, too much distance. But he watched Crane's face, the micro-adjustments, the way he looked at Robin and then looked ahead and then looked at her again, and he could read the general shape of it the way you read a conversation through a window. Robin said something that made Crane stop walking. He stood in the hallway and looked at whatever she'd said for a long moment. Then he looked at Luffy, directly, across the distance. Luffy held the look without expression. Crane turned back to Robin and said something, not long, and she listened and nodded once, and then he walked away down the hallway, straight-backed, the Admiral's coat immaculate, the same self-possession he'd had on the dock at midnight. Luffy waited. Robin came back across the hallway and stood in front of him. "He's going to withdraw the oversight referral recommendation," she said. "What?" "He's going to go back and formally withdraw it before it processes." She said it steadily. "Which means the designation 7 weapons record gets suppressed. It won't go to public review." Luffy stared at her. "Why would he?" "Because I told him what would happen if it did go to public review," Robin said. "I know what that weapon was built to do. The targeting parameters aren't unique to me. There are other names in the operational file. People who've been targeted before who don't know they were targeted. If that file opens in a public review..." She paused. "It's not just Crane who has a problem. It's the entire upper tier of marine experimental programs. The damage is wider than one admiral. So he's protecting the institution," Luffy said. "He's protecting people," Robin said. "Specifically the scientists who built it under orders, who didn't choose the targets, who would be exposed in the review." She held his gaze. "That's what he said. Verbatim. He said, I won't let the people who are just doing their jobs take the weight of decisions that were mine." Luffy was quiet for a moment. "He's still in there," Robin said. "The person who spent 6 years believing in something. He's under the Admiral. He's been under it for a long time." She paused. "I don't know what he'll do next. He's still committed to his method. But today changed something," Luffy said. "Today changed something," she agreed. He thought about that. About the specific complicated humanity of a man who was wrong about his method but right about his care, who had built something harmful because he genuinely believed it was necessary, who was standing in a hallway in the institution he'd chosen and making a decision that cost him something to protect people who worked for him. That was the thing about people. Even the ones who were wrong. Even the ones who sent 9 ships. They were still people, still doing the thing that people did, trying to protect what mattered to them, going about it badly sometimes, but the underneath of it's still alive. He couldn't forgive the weapon. He didn't have to. But he could see the person. "Okay," he said. "Okay," Robin said. Across the hallway, Nami was watching him with the particular attention she gave to moments she wanted to remember. He met her eyes and she gave him a look that said, "Everything. All of it." The dock and the morning and the tribunal and the hallway and all 7 days of sailing and the kitchen table with the maps. All of it compressed into one expression that was hers and specific, and for him. He held it for a moment. Then Frankie said something extremely loud about the architecture of the ceiling and Chopper fell over trying to look at it, and Usopp caught him and the moment became what moments always became. The next thing, the ongoing thing, the beautiful ordinary chaos of people he loved existing in the same space. The world had decided. Now they went home. Chapter 6, King of Something Better. The Sunny left G1 on a morning tide with no fanfare and no escort. That was the thing that struck Luffy, standing at the bow as the complex shrank behind them. No fanfare. No fleet tracking their departure. No vice-admirals on the harbor wall making sure they actually left. Just the Sunny moving out on the tide, sails filling with the westward wind, the lion figurehead pointing home, and the manufactured island of the most heavily fortified marine base in the world receding into the kind of distance that eventually made everything look small. He had expected something. Some final move, some last attempt to reframe the narrative before they got away clean. Crane was not a man who left loose threads, and the tribunal's outcome was a loose thread by any measure, a formally documented defeat, logged in the public record, already moving through Den relay networks to every news outlet in the Grand Line. But nothing came. Just open water and the Sunny and the crew doing the specific things they did in the first hour after leaving somewhere significant, the collective decompression of people who had been holding a great deal of tension and were now, carefully, putting it down. Usopp told a story about the tribunal that was already approximately 40% embellished, and it was getting more embellished with each telling, which meant by the time they reached Windmere it would be essentially mythology. Chopper was listening to every version with equal intensity and belief, which was part of what made Usopp tell stories in the first place. Frankie had found something structural on the Sunny that needed adjusting. There was always something, always would be, and was working on it with the focused joy of a man doing exactly what he was built for. Brook was playing on the aft deck, something new, something that had the quality of being composed in real time, finding its shape as it went. Zoro was already training. Robin was reading. Sanji was in the galley, and the smell coming from it was the particular combination that meant he was working seriously, putting care into something, which he did when he needed to process things he didn't talk about. Jinbe stood near the helm, one hand on the wheel, and navigated with the patient authority of a man who understood the sea at a level below language. Nami was at the navigator's table with the route plotted and the log updating and a cup of coffee going cold beside her because she kept forgetting to drink it, which was how you knew she was genuinely focused on something. Luffy watched all of it from the bow and felt the specific enormous thing that had no exact name, something between gratitude and love and the steady animal knowledge of belonging somewhere. These people. This ship. This particular arrangement of people on a ship that had been through everything and come out moving. He'd chosen Nami. He'd chosen the island. He'd chosen the quiet life on the shore. But he hadn't lost this. He'd never been asked to lose this. The crew was still the crew, scattered now, living their own lives in the space between adventures, but the moment something mattered they were here. They would always be here. That was what they were. Not a crew in the formal sense, not an organization with rules and hierarchies and institutional memory. Something older and stranger than that. People who had looked at each other in impossible situations and decided, at the foundational level, that the answer was yes. He stayed at the bow until the wind picked up properly and the Sunny found her stride on the water, that specific pace that was hers, fast and alive and joyful in the way only a ship that had been built by someone who loved building could be. Then he went to find something to eat. 3 days out from G1, the news reached them. Not through official channels, through the network that Robin maintained through the old revolutionary relay system, the one that moved information faster and more honestly than any official outlet. It came in fragments, the way things came through that network, requiring assembly, pieces arriving out of order, context emerging gradually, the full picture building itself from parts. Robin assembled it, as she always did, and brought it to Luffy on deck in the early afternoon. The transcript of the tribunal was circulating. Not the official Marine summary, the full transcript, including Crane's designation 7 weapon, including Yua's direct language about the evidentiary record, including Luffy's statement word for word. Someone had leaked it within hours of the proceedings ending. Not Crane. The leak had too much tactical precision to be accidental, which meant it had been deliberate and meant to serve a purpose that the leaker had specific opinions about. Robin suspected it was Voss, the Rear Admiral who had stood on Kale Point's dock and told Luffy, carefully and specifically, that Crane was not interested in a fair fight. The transcript was on every major island with a den relay. It was being read in taverns and copied by hand in places too small or remote to have proper communication infrastructure. It was being argued over by island councils and pirate crews and merchant guilds and fishing communities and naval officers who weren't part of Crane's hand-selected unit, and were forming their own opinions about what the whole thing said. "What are people saying?" Luffy asked. Robin considered her answer with the care she brought to consequential things. "Mostly," she said, "they're saying what Nami said they would. That the world government sent 9 ships to a fishing island." She paused. "But there's something else. Something I didn't anticipate." "What?" "They're talking about the statement you made in the chamber. About fighting for places that had nothing to give you." She looked at him. "Specifically, people are talking about it in the context of the choice you made. The retirement. The island." She paused again, choosing. The argument that was supposed to discredit you, that love made you weaker, that attachment was a liability, it's being read as the opposite. People are looking at what you did at Windmere and Kale Point and the tribunal, and they're concluding that the love didn't diminish you. That choosing something specific made you more specific. More precise. More human, Luffy said. Robin looked at him. Yes. Exactly. He thought about that. About Crane's original argument, that the idea of him was dangerous, that the symbol of unchained individual freedom was a destabilizing force. And the way the world had received the counter-argument, which wasn't really an argument at all, just a record of what he'd actually done. Crane was right about one thing, Luffy said. What? That I'm a symbol. He looked at the water. He just got the symbol wrong. Robin was quiet for a moment. The oversight referral, she said. He did withdraw it. I confirmed this morning. She looked at Luffy. The designation 7 file is suppressed. It won't go to public review. Good. The weapon's existence is in the transcript. That's already public. But the operational details, the targeting records, the other names. She folded her hands. They stay quiet. Luffy nodded. He thought about the hallway, about Crane walking away straight-backed and immaculate with something changed underneath the immaculate. He thought about what Robin had said. He won't let the people who were just doing their jobs take the weight of decisions that were mine. Wrong method. Right underneath. He wondered what Crane would do next. Not as a threat, just as a genuine question. A man that intelligent, with that much history and that much genuine care, pointing himself at the right thing with the wrong tools. What happened when the wrong tools stopped working? Maybe nothing. Maybe he rebuilt his model and found new tools that were just as wrong in different ways. That happened. It happened a lot. Or maybe not. Luffy couldn't know. He left the question open and let the sea hold it. They were 2 days from Windmere when Zoro found him. Not on deck, below, in the narrow corridor outside the men's quarters, where Luffy had gone to get something from his room and was standing in the corridor reading the piece of Roger's map again by the light of the porthole. He did this sometimes when the ship was quiet. Not looking for answers in it, just looking at it. At the handwriting. At the geography of something he didn't fully understand yet. Zoro leaned in the corridor doorway and looked at the map without asking what it was. He'd have recognized the paper. He'd have felt the weight of it from 20 feet away. You're not going after it, Zoro said. Not now, Luffy said. Not now. Zoro considered this phrasing. But not never. Luffy looked at the map. At the coastline in Roger's hand, the notes in the margins that were half cipher and half shorthand and entirely someone else's personal record of their own understanding. Shanks said I'd know when the time comes, he said. If the time comes. What do you think? I think the time is not right now. He folded the map and held it. Right now is the island. The garden. Nami's charts on the kitchen table. He looked at Zoro. Right now is enough. Zoro was quiet for a moment. He had the specific look he sometimes got, not contemplative, because Zoro didn't really do contemplative, but the hard focused attention of someone examining something they'd been avoiding examining. I want to ask you something, he said. You've been not asking it for the whole trip. Yeah. Zoro looked at the porthole. Do you think I'll know? When I get there? He meant the goal. The one he'd carried since childhood, the same way Luffy had carried his, absolute, central, non-negotiable. The greatest swordsman in the world. Mihawk's title. The peak of something. Do you think I'll know when I've got it? What to do with it after? Luffy thought about it seriously because the question was serious and Zoro was asking it for real. I think you'll know, he said. I think you'll find out it was always about the thing underneath the goal, not the goal itself. Same way I did. And what's the thing underneath my goal? You know what it is. Zoro was quiet. You've known for a long time, Luffy said. You're just waiting until you beat Mihawk to admit it. Zoro made a sound that was non-committal and pushed off the doorframe. He walked back down the corridor, and just before he turned the corner he said, without looking back, "You were a good captain, Luffy. Just so you know." "Was?" Luffy said. "Still are." He turned the corner. "You're just a good captain of a smaller thing now." Luffy stood in the corridor with Roger's map in his hand and the porthole light on the old paper, and he thought about that. A good captain of a smaller thing. He turned it over and looked at it from different angles, the way you looked at charts, not for what they said directly but for what they implied about the space between lines. No. Not smaller. Different. He put the map back against his chest and went up to the deck. Windmere appeared on the morning of the 7th day. Nami called it from the navigator's table, not dramatically, just "Island 2 points off the bow, 2 hours." The way she called all of them. Professional, specific, accurate. He was on the deck when she said it, and he turned and looked, and yes, low against the horizon, the specific shape of it, the bluff at the southern end, and the way the light came off the water around it, that was different from the light anywhere else because it was those 3-direction currents that did it, the particular refraction of 3 tides meeting. He recognized it. Not the way you recognized a place you'd been, the way you recognized something you'd chosen. Something that had your own fingerprints on it. The crew came on deck in 1s and 2s as the island grew. Not because there was anything to do. Jinbe had the helm and Nami had the route, and there was nothing required from any of them, but because this was home, was the specific place that the person they all loved most had decided to call home, and so it mattered, and they came to watch it arrive. The harbor was as they'd left it. Frankie's cannon mount on the east wall, still there. The dock, the fishing boats returned from the northern cove and back in their places. The town, low and practical and weathered, exactly what it had always been. Greta was at her cart. Luffy spotted her from the Sunny's deck as they came into harbor, the eel cart in its corner, and he grinned at the back of her head as she turned to look at the incoming ship with the narrowed assessment she gave to everything. He waved. She pointed at her cart wheel. He laughed. The Sunny dropped anchor in the harbor with the clean precision of a crew that had done it 10,000 times, and they came ashore in the launch, and the people of Windmere came out in the particular way of a small island receiving news it had been waiting for. Not a crowd, not ceremony, just people emerging from their ordinary mourning and being present. Olu was at the dock with his spyglass still in hand, which meant he'd been watching their approach from the watchtower, and had come down specifically to meet them. His knee didn't seem to be bothering him. He looked at Luffy and nodded once, deeply, sincerely, the nod of a man who understood what the week had meant and didn't need to say it. Joran was there too, the large quiet fisherman who'd organized the evacuations, who never asked questions and always helped. He shook Luffy's hand with the gravity of someone whose concept of a handshake was substantial. Luffy looked at the island around him. At the houses and the tavern with its slight leftward lean and the smooth-worn street and the posting board with the week-old news. He looked up at the path that led to the house on the hill. "Go," Sanji said, appearing at his shoulder. "We'll sort the ship." "You just got here," Luffy said. "I'm aware." Sanji looked up at the house. "Go." Luffy went. The gate was still broken. He stopped at it, looked at it. One hinge had given way about 3 weeks before they'd left, and he'd been meaning to fix it and hadn't, and then everything had happened, and now it was hanging at its characteristic angle, swinging slightly in the morning wind. He lifted it back into approximate position and made a mental note that was probably going to remain a mental note for another 3 weeks minimum. The garden. He stood in front of it and assessed. The left side was still doing well, better actually. The things Nami had planted there had grown while they were gone, slightly wild, but the good kind of wild. The right side had gone further into its catastrophic divergence from agricultural principles. He was going to have to do actual research about the soil on the right side, which was a level of effort he hadn't previously committed to but was now considering. He went inside. The house was cool and slightly dusty from a week of absence, the particular way houses held the quiet of not being lived in for a short time, not abandoned, just waiting. He opened the kitchen window, and the morning came in. Looked at the table where Nami's charts were still spread out, exactly as she'd left them. The coffee cup she'd forgotten to put away. His jacket over the chair back. He stood in the kitchen of the house they'd chosen on the island she'd picked, and he breathed it in. The cool and the dust, and the outside coming through the window, and the specific texture of a life that was his. He heard her on the path before she reached the gate. He recognized her footsteps the same way he'd recognized the Sunny's voice, something learned and internalized beyond conscious tracking. She pushed the broken gate. It resisted. She pushed harder with the particular impatience she reserved for inanimate objects that disagreed with her, and came through and up the path and into the house. She stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at him. He looked at her. She had the straw hat's brim in her hand. She must have taken it off his back on the walk up, which she sometimes did, not wearing it, just holding it. She held it out to him. He took it and put it on the table. Then he crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and put his arms around her. No ceremony, no build-up, just the direct, uncomplicated gesture of someone doing the thing they'd wanted to do since they got off the Sunny and had been managing other things in the intervening time. She came into it without hesitation, her face against his shoulder, her hands gripping the back of his shirt. They stood like that for a while. Outside, the morning was doing what mornings did on Windmere, the specific gold of 3-current light, the sound of the harbor below. Somewhere in the town Greta was audible in the distance. "We need coffee," Nami said eventually into his shoulder. "Yeah," he said. Neither of them moved for another minute. Then she pulled back, not away, just to a conversational distance, and looked at him with the expression that was hers, only hers, the one she'd never let anyone else have. "Are you okay?" she said, asking the real question, as she always did. "Yeah." He held her gaze. "Are you?" She considered it with genuine honesty, the way she considered things when they mattered. "I will be," she said. "Give me 3 days and a week of normal mornings and I'll be fine." "Normal mornings?" he said. "Fishing rod. Coffee. The fish not biting. You breaking something before 9. She turned to the counter and picked up the coffee pot. "Absolutely normal." He watched her start the coffee. He sat down at the table. He reached over and straightened the edges of her charts, not moving them, just aligning them, a small organizing gesture that accomplished nothing practical and felt right anyway. "The right side of the garden," he said. "What about it? I'm going to actually fix it this time." She looked at him over her shoulder with an expression that was diplomatically skeptical. "How?" "Research." The expression shifted from diplomatic skepticism to genuine surprise. "Research," she repeated. "Yeah. I'll look into what's wrong with the soil. Actually figure it out." He paused. "Chopper probably knows about plants. Or Robin." "Robin knows about everything," Nami said. "Then Robin will help me." She looked at him for a long moment, the coffee pot in her hand, the morning in the window behind her, and her expression was doing something complicated that eventually resolved into the almost smile that was her most honest expression. "Okay," she said. "I would like that." "The gate too," he said. "The gate," she agreed. "And the ceiling in the loft." She set the coffee pot down. "Are you making a list?" "Yeah." "Of things to fix?" "Yeah." She looked at him with that reading expression, the navigator's gaze applied to something she wanted to understand completely. "You're happy," she said. "Yeah. Even after all of it. The fleet and the tribunal and because of all of it," he said. "Not despite it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she poured 2 cups of coffee and brought them to the table and sat across from him and slid 1 cup toward him. He picked it up immediately and burned his mouth. Same way he always did. Every single time. She shook her head with the fond exasperation of someone who had stopped being surprised by this but had not stopped being entertained by it. "You're impossible," she said. "I know," he said, grinning, burned mouth and all. The crew stayed for 2 days. It was not planned, there was no formal decision made about it, no announcement. They simply didn't leave immediately, and then another day passed, and by the second day it was clear that leaving was going to happen when it happened and not before. Sanji took over the kitchen entirely, with Nami's permission and Luffy's enthusiasm, and produced meals that Greta, who had been invited to dinner on the second evening with the casual disregard for social convention that was Luffy's standard approach to hospitality, declared were the best things she'd ever eaten, and then immediately began interrogating Sanji about his sources for the smoked fish. Because she had professional opinions. Usopp and Chopper spent most of both days with the island's children, which was inevitable and correct. Usopp told stories, the children believed all of them at various ratios, and Chopper's medical instincts had him checking on a sick family in the north part of the island before the first morning was done. By the second evening he treated 4 minor ailments, and set a broken finger, and become the most popular person in Windmere. Frankie fixed the gate. He did it in 1 hour, efficiently and permanently, and then looked at the rest of the house's exterior with an expression that suggested several additional projects were occurring to him. Nami gave him a very direct look and he redirected his attention to the harbor wall's eastern section, which genuinely needed more work. Brooke played in the tavern on the second evening, not a performance, or it became one, but it started as him sitting in the corner with his violin because the atmosphere suited it. By the time the evening was half over, the tavern had filled up, including people who weren't regular tavern people, including Olu, who sat in the back with his spyglass inexplicably still in hand and listened to Brooke play a piece that was ancient and enormous and sailed through the low beams of the anchor and the argument like something that had been looking for that exact room for a very long time. Zoro disappeared into the hills with his swords and didn't come back until the morning of the second day, which meant he trained through the night, which was simply Zoro being Zoro. Jinbe sat on the dock with his feet in the water and watched the horizon and appeared to be exactly as content as it was possible to be. Robin found a quiet garden, someone's private one, a different house from Luffy and Nami's, with better soil on both sides, and sat there with a book and let the island's particular quality of peace do whatever it was going to do. By the afternoon, the garden's owner had come out and started talking to her, and by the evening they were deep in a conversation about historical botanical practices that had apparently been relevant to something Robin had been researching for years and was now finding answers to in a fishing village on a small island in the New World, which was where answers often turned up when you stopped looking for them. And Luffy fixed things. The gate, with Frankie's help. The ceiling in the loft. He couldn't quite fix it, but he reinforced the beam it was sagging from so it sagged in a structurally sound way, which was approximately a fix. He worked on the right side of the garden with Robin's guidance. She'd stopped by in the morning and within 4 minutes had identified the soil problem, which was a mineral deficiency that could be corrected with a specific amendment available from the fishing quarters supply shed. He spent 2 hours amending it, which was longer than he usually spent on anything that didn't involve fighting, and the garden at the end of it looked the same but was categorically better, which was sometimes how improvement worked. Nami watched him from the house. Not all the time. She had her own things, the charts, the calculations, the ongoing project of understanding every weather pattern this island would ever produce. But sometimes she looked out the window and he was there, working on the garden or talking to one of the crew or sitting on the wall eating something Sanji had given him, and the expression she allowed herself in those moments was the most honest thing on her face all day. On the morning of the third day the crew left, in the particular way they did everything, not all at once, a gradual drift toward the dock, toward the sunny, toward the next thing each of them was going toward. No formal goodbye. Not with this crew. That was not the shape of what they were. Usopp hugged Luffy too long and started to say something and then didn't, and Luffy let the hug run its full course without comment. Chopper said he'd visit. He meant it. Frankie gave the harbor wall one final assessment look, nodded with professional satisfaction, and went. Brooke bowed deeply and played one chord on the violin as he walked away, a single, full, resonant chord that was its own kind of farewell. Jinbe stopped at the dock and turned and looked at him. Luffy looked back. Nothing was said. Nothing needed to be. They stood in the morning light with the sea behind Jinbe and the island behind Luffy and the specific complete understanding of two people who knew exactly what each other was and had decided that was exactly right. Jinbe turned and went aboard. Robin was last. She stopped in front of him and looked at him with those deep, calm, ancient eyes, the ones that had seen enough of the world to know what the rare things looked like. You know the tribunal changed things, she said. Not just for us. Yeah. The precedent you established, that a powerful individual acting with deliberate civilian protection cannot be deemed a structural threat, it's in the record. She held his gaze. It will be cited. For other people. In other places. For years. He hadn't thought about it in those terms. He thought about it now, the cascade of it, the way things moved through systems, the record of what had happened at the G1 judicial complex becoming something that someone in a different room on a different island used to defend a different person in a different situation. Good, he said. Yes. She looked at him for a moment longer, with the expression that was her version of warmth, contained, specific, real. Goodbye, Luffy. Bye, Robin. She turned and went aboard. He stood at the dock and watched the sunny sails go up. Watched Jimby take the wheel. Watched the ship come alive the way she always came alive, eagerly, the way she'd been built, with joy in the function of herself. She moved out of the harbor on the morning tide, and the lion figurehead caught the light, and the crew moved on her deck in the easy flowing patterns of people who belonged to each other and to the sea, and Luffy watched until she was well clear of the harbor mouth, until she had the open water around her and the wind was properly in her sails. He raised his hand. From the stern, Zoro turned. He didn't wave. It wasn't a wave, it was a chin lift, that particular acknowledgement that was his alone and meant everything it needed to mean. Luffy lowered his hand. He stood at the dock and listened to the water and felt the sunny's wake come in and break against the dock posts and go back out. Felt the island at his back. The house on the hill. The fixed gate. The improved garden. He put his hand inside his shirt and took out Roger's map. He held it in the morning light and looked at it. The handwriting, the coastline, the notes that were someone else's story written in someone else's hand. He thought about what Roger had found when he got there. He thought about the laugh, the full, real laugh of a man who had arrived at the end of the longest possible road and found something there that he couldn't tell anyone about because it wasn't a thing you could tell. You had to get there. Or not. Or you got somewhere else and found a different thing that was just as real, just as complete, just as incapable of being told. He folded the map back into its cloth and put it away. Then he turned and walked back through Windmere. Past the tavern. Past the posting board. Past Greta's corner, where Greta was setting up her cart with the systematic stubbornness of someone who had been doing this every morning for 40 years and intended to continue. She looked at him as he passed. He looked at her. Gates fixed, he said. About time, she said. He grinned. She looked away with the expression of someone who was absolutely not affected by the grin. He kept walking. Up the gravel path. Through the fixed gate that swung properly now, both hinges solid, no wobble. Past the garden, left side thriving, right side improved if not yet thriving, give it 2 weeks, and to the door of the house. He went inside. Nami was at the table. Not charts this time. The table was cleared specifically, intentionally, which was unusual enough to be notable. She had 2 cups of coffee and she was sitting with her hands around one of them and looking at the window and the morning outside it, and when he came in she looked at him with an expression that was open in a way she didn't usually allow. She'd been waiting for him. He sat down. Took the other cup. Did not burn his mouth this time. He held it first, felt the heat through the ceramic, let it tell him when to drink. She watched him do this with something close to disbelief. You're being careful, she said. I learn things eventually, he said. She made the almost laugh sound. Looked at her cup. Looked at the window. It's going to be quiet now, she said. Yeah. The fleet's gone. The tribunal's done. Cranes. She paused. Whatever Crane is. Yeah. The world knows what happened. She traced the rim of her cup with one finger. They'll leave us alone for a while. Probably. Not forever. No, he said. Not forever. He looked at the window with her, at the morning, at the slice of harbor visible between the rooftops. But for now. For now, she said. They sat with that for a moment, the for now of it, which was not nothing, which was actually substantial, which was more than a lot of people ever got. For now was mornings and coffee and the garden and the dock and the fish that didn't care who he was. For now was enough. There's something I've been wanting to tell you, Nami said. He looked at her. She was still looking at the window, a small furrow between her brows that was not worry exactly but the expression of someone organizing something. When we were at the tribunal, she said. When you were talking, in the chamber, I was watching the gallery. She paused. There was a woman in the back. Old, maybe 70. She had a shawl and a notepad and she was writing down everything you said. Nami looked at him. Not in shorthand. Not in cipher. In regular writing. Like she wanted every word. She paused. She was crying. Not obviously, she was trying not to. But she was. He listened. I don't know who she was. I didn't ask. But I kept thinking about her afterward. About what she was writing down. Nami looked at her cup. I think she was someone who needed to hear it. Not the legal argument. The thing underneath, that it's okay to choose something. That choosing something specific isn't giving up. That, she stopped. That love isn't smaller than freedom, he said. She looked at him. Yeah. That's why we went, he said. Not just to win the argument. Not just because the record mattered even though it did. He looked at the window. Because somebody in that room needed to hear it. And probably a lot of somebodies out there needed to read it. She was quiet for a moment. You knew that going in? I knew something like that, he said. I always know something like that. I'm just usually moving too fast to explain it. She looked at him with an expression that was almost laughing and almost something more. You're more complicated than you pretend to be, she said. I'm not complicated, he said. I know what I care about. And what do you care about? He looked at her directly, without decoration, the way he always said important things. You. The crew. The island. The fish that ignore my fishing rod. He paused. The left side of the garden. The right side is going to be better in 2 weeks, she said. I know. Robin's soil amendment plan is solid. I know. The gate is really good now, she said. Frankie did good work. I asked him to leave the loft ceiling alone. I noticed. The beam is fine. I reinforced it. She looked at him. I know you did. I checked it last night. Something moved in her expression, the specific warmth of someone who notices things and is grateful for the noticing. You're taking care of the house. Yeah. You actually like doing it. He thought about whether that was true. The gate and the garden and the beam and the 2 hours amending soil with Robin guiding him through the mineral deficiency of a badly planted garden bed. Whether he'd liked it. Yeah, he said. It's like. He thought about how to say it. It's like fighting, kind of. There's a problem. You figure out what the problem actually is. You fix it. He paused. Except nothing gets broken in the process. Usually. She smiled. Not the almost smile, the real one, full and specific and for him. That's the best argument for domestic life I've ever heard. She said. It's like fighting but nothing breaks. Nothing important, he said. Nothing important. She agreed. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. Not the wrist this time, his hand. He turned it over so they were palm to palm and held it, and she let him, and outside the morning was going about its morning with the complete indifference of mornings to the weight of the things happening inside the houses they shone through. They stayed like that for a while. Later, when the coffee was finished and the morning had moved into the full activity of a windmere day, fishing boats going out, Greta and her cart, the children running the speed of children running, Luffy went down to the dock. He sat at the end with his feet over the water. No fishing rod. Just himself and the water and the fish moving in their slow silver loops below. The gull landed on the railing again. Same gull, probably. It had the same suspicious yellow eye, the same assessment of whether Luffy was someone worth bothering. Still not sharing, Luffy told it. It stared. I don't have anything anyway, he said. It stared harder. He looked at the water. At the light coming off it, the specific refraction of three tides meeting that made this harbor different from every other harbor he'd been in, the quality of light that was Windmere's own, irreducible and unrepeatable anywhere else. He looked south, at the open sea. At the horizon. The horizon was empty. Just water and sky and the specific blue that was the Grand Line's water, deeper than any other oceans, more saturated, like the sea itself knew it was the most significant ocean in the world and dressed accordingly. He thought about Roger. He thought about Shanks on the dock. He thought about the woman in the back of the gallery with the shawl and the notepad, writing down every word with someone else's tears on her face. He thought about Yua's voice. The subject's conduct demonstrates consistent and active protection of civilians. He thought about Zoro in the corridor. You're just a good captain of a smaller thing now. Not smaller. Different. He was a captain. He had always been a captain. The title didn't require a ship or a crew or a destination. It was something he was at the level of character, the quality of the person rather than the position. He'd been a captain at 7 years old in a mountain bandit's hideout. He was a captain now on a dock in a fishing village with his feet over water full of fish that didn't respect him. King of pirates. He'd spent his whole life chasing it. He'd never not believed in it. Didn't stop believing in it now. The dream was still the dream, real, enormous, worth chasing by someone who still needed to chase it. Roger had found something there that he couldn't tell anyone. Luffy had found something here that he was still figuring out how to name. Maybe they were the same thing. Maybe freedom arrived at the same place regardless of the road. Maybe it always looked like this: a morning, a dock, a person you loved making coffee in a house with a fixed gate, and the sea ahead of you open and wide and full of everything the world had ever put in it. He'd chosen love over the crown. But he never stopped being who he was. The love hadn't diminished him. The crown hadn't defined him. Both were true simultaneously, which was the thing he hadn't been sure of before the island, before the choice, before Nami's hand on the kitchen table and 9 ships on the horizon and Crane on a midnight dock and Yua's voice in a high-ceiling chamber and all of it, adding up to this morning, this dock, this specific unbothered quality of fish not caring who he was. He grinned. At the water. At the fish. At the gull, who had given up and left. At the sea, which was enormous and blue and entirely itself, which had always been the thing about the sea. It was entirely itself in all conditions, in all weather, in all light, and it did not apologize for the size of itself or diminish for anyone. Neither did he. He was Monkey D. Luffy. He had fought emperors and admirals and monsters and the weight of fate and the specific stubborn pull of a dream that had been his whole life's direction. He had walked into Marine headquarters and told the truth and walked back out. He had chosen an island and a woman and a broken gate and a garden with soil problems, and none of those choices had made him less. If anything, they had made him more specific. More himself. More free. Not king of pirates. Something else. Something that didn't have a title because it had never needed one, the kind of freedom that existed before titles, that made titles possible, that was the thing Roger had laughed about at the end of the longest road in the world. He sat on the dock with his feet over the water, and the morning held him there, and the sea stretched out in every direction, limitless and alive, and it knew who he was. He knew who he was. That was enough. That had always been enough. Behind him, up the path, Nami opened the kitchen window wider to let the morning in, and put a fresh pot of coffee on, and spread a new chart across the table, an uncharted section of the Eastern Sea, somewhere she hadn't mapped yet, full of unknown currents, and weather patterns and coastlines that were waiting to be understood. She picked up her pencil. She began.